Mr. Kennedy?
On item 1, I'd like to ask staff simply, are there any additional resources that if I've got this right, any additional resources that we could provide the Pasadena Senior Center, given the fact that it is in the heart of the community at the Gold Line, where many folks come to our city to receive our resources, and we do not turn them away. That's one set of folks. But then there's also another group of folks that are clearly in Pasadena and have roots in Pasadena that take advantage of the Pasadena Senior Center. The allocation is $35,000. And I asked staff, are there any additional resources that we could provide the Pasadena Senior Center? It's one of our hallmark organizations in serving particularly seniors who have great needs.
Councilmember Kennedy, I'll turn to Bill Wong and Randy Mabson to answer your question, but let me start with an answer that's less than a full answer. We're still, as of today, analyzing the rules that are coming down regarding the federal relief. So it is conceivable that in addition to the action that we're asking the council to take today, that there may be additional dollars that are provided to provide support for organizations such as the Senior Center. But let me turn to Randy or to Bill to answer your immediate question.
Yes, thank you, Councilmember. This is Bill Wong. The Senior Center provides a vast array of very important services, as you mentioned. With respect to this particular RFP for food pantry services, they were funded for their full request.
Okay, that satisfies my question. Thank you very much, staff, and thank you very much, Mayor.
Thank you, Ms. Rivas.
Thank you, Mayor. I just would want to briefly disclose that I am employed by the county, the Office of the County Council, regarding item 4, which involves authorizing the city manager to enter a contract with the county just for pass-through funding from the CDC. So obviously I don't have any personal interest. It's just pass-through funding, but in an abundance of caution, I wanted to disclose this for the record and also ask the city clerk to reflect that in the minutes.
Yes, I'm confirming we will do that.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. And these are government to government pass-through dollars, and so there's no issue there, but I think it's correct to make a public record.
Mayor, we did get a late letter for item number 2. This is just correspondence. It's one letter was received recommending that all fees and hookup charges be dropped as it relates to affordable ADUs. So that letter we just received recently, and we will distribute it to the council, post it online, and make part of it the record for that item, for item number 2.
Thank you. Okay. Is there a motion on the consent calendar?
So moved.
Second. Moved and seconded. Roll call.
Councilmember Hampton is still not here, so absent. Councilmember Kennedy.
Yes.
Councilmember Madison is absent. Councilmember Masuda.
Yes.
Councilmember Rivas.
Yes.
Councilmember Williams.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Wilson.
Yes.
Mayor Gordo.
Yes.
The motion is approved without objection.
Okay. Next, we'll move on to
Public comment.
public comment. For matters not on the agenda.
So the first speaker for public comment on matters not on the agenda is Alan Shea, followed by Jane Ward, and we're trying to locate an Olden denim. So Mr. Shea. Mr. Shea, go ahead and unmute, and you have 3 minutes starting now.
You hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, first of all, I wanted to thank you, Mayor Gordo and city council members. As most of you are aware, our chief has indicated that he is set to retire in 2022. A article came out today in Pasadena Now. I think it's kind of disingenuous for such a report to come out after we have asked that you fire the chief for the last 60 days specifically. There's been no comments, no reactions by the city council, and the community is really having real issues with this. Here, the police chief can make a decision on his own accord, whereas our city council and our city manager have no say-so in what the community is asking. And certainly we have made requests that we agendize at least a video, since the city council seemed to take a very careful position with the fact that there's litigation. That's not what the community wants to hear. We're the only ones in the country that hasn't taken a real action against the police, considering what the videos show. And that's unbelievable. Not only that, but we have also delivered to the city council video in which it shows Anthony dropping his cell phone at the point where the police brought in this gun that they placed within the crime scene, and then subsequently picked it up and planted it in front of the park. Then they're going to say that the DNA that was on the tattered gun was Anthony's, when Anthony had no gun. All these things are, you got 3 or 4 attorneys on the city council. Come on. We have bright people. What are you telling our community as to
30
how
seconds.
we are? If this is how it's going to come about, it's really going to raise awareness that we need some change. And I've been doing this from the very first day that there was a city council meeting as to what this video shows. And the city council and all others associated with this, including the public safety committee, has disregarded what has been communicated to this governance board here. That's absurd. So I really
Your
hope
3
that
minutes are expired, sir.
buy into what has been pitched by that article. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker will be Jane Ward, followed by Olden Denham, followed by Jill Shook. Miss Ward,
Hello,
yes, we can hear you. Go ahead. Your 3 minutes start now.
thank you. Hello, City Council members. I'm speaking today on behalf of Showing Up for Racial Justice, or SURGE, and I'd like to speak to 2 issues this afternoon. The first is the retirement announcement by Police Chief John Tess and demands for Chief Perez to be fired. He has announced that he will retire, but not until January of 2022. We want to be clear that this announcement does not relieve him or the city's leaders from accountability for the racist violence committed against Chris Ballou and Anthony McLean. We are going to continue to demand innovative approaches to public safety that do not rely on and reward ineffective and racist law enforcement agencies, but that invest in addressing the root causes of community problems. We're going to continue to demand the firing of Officer Dumagwindon, who shot and killed Anthony McLean and is still out patrolling the streets of Pasadena. The second issue we want to address is the $5.2 million that the council has been asked by Steve Mermel to approve so that Pasadena Police Department can make improvements to their building and replace their current mobile command center truck with a new one. It is our view that we need a central library. We need our central library to be open more than we need yet another police vehicle that can be used to surveil the community. And it is our view that we need more housing for the growing unhoused population of Pasadena more than we need the police station to be remodeled. The community requests more evidence about the stated need of this use of our tax dollars for investments in policing. We want to know who has decided and using what measures that the police building is more important than other capital improvements. Why do we need a new police truck? What's wrong with the old one? And do the people paying for these investments get to have a voice in how our money is being spent? Thank you, council members, for any answers and clarifications that you can provide.
Okay, thank you. We will bring in Alan Shea again, but that's for Olden Denham. I believe Alan Shea is with Mr. Denham because Mr. Denham is having trouble connecting, and it's just a way for Mr. Denham to connect. So please unmute. So please unmute.
Mr. Dunn?
Yes, he's here.
Could you please put him on the
Hi,
phone?
and greetings to all you councilmen and the mayor. And at any rate, some of you know me. How you doing, John? At any rate, I know this probably isn't on your schedule, but I want to address the Anthony McLean situation. It's an ugly situation, and in my opinion, there is never an excuse for shooting someone in the back. There's a couple other questions that I would like even you to look at. One is the first picture they showed the gun. They showed the gun on the west side of the street by the park, and then later on they show finding a gun on the east side of the street. That is totally unexplainable. But that's the point is there is never a justification for shooting someone in the back, running away from you. And I just got a letter from Mr. Perez, and he said, and from what I understand, he's gonna retire or quit at 2022. I mean, that's just a way of backing out of it. I don't think we should permit him to quit. I think he should be fired, reprimanded for what he's done, because what he has done is covered down. And what we're trying to move to a more just place, and letting them just slide out the back door is not a just way of reprimanding bad actions. And that's pretty much the gist of it. We want to see justice. We don't want to see the same thing going on and on.
All right, thank you.
That's pretty much the gist of my conversation.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
A question,
Mr. Kennedy?
as it relates to the comments of the last speaker, at the appropriate time in closed session, I'd ask that the city attorney, city prosecutor brief us about the allegation of the movement of a gun, which is news to me. So if it is appropriate, I'd ask that the city attorney, city prosecutor brief the council in closed session. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll confer with the city attorney.
Yeah, it was me again. And I want to thank Councilmember Kennedy for mentioning that and having that reviewed. What we can review in public session, in my opinion, should be reviewed in public session. So I would like to have it agendized in some sort of way or form or fashion at a public safety meeting. This is, definitely a serious matter for all of us to be hearing about, the movement of a gun or anything like that. But anything that's related to the investigation that can be shared with the public should be shared. And then I'd also would like to say that's pretty much it. I won't, I'll just leave the rest of my comments for when we can, bring this to a public session.
Yeah, so there are two issues. There's the issue of litigation updates, and those are appropriate for closed session. And then there's the issue of the investigation itself, and what can be made public and at what point. I think right at this point, we're still waiting to hear from the city manager's office and then there's a third, let me back up, there's a third point, and that's the issue of administrative review for purposes of training and or any appropriate discipline or none. And I don't know that those three processes have run their course to the point where it would be appropriate to agendize the matters for public session. There's also a review by the district attorney, and I'll look to the city manager. Mr. City Manager, has this matter specifically been submitted to the district attorney for review, and has that review been, if so, has that review been completed? Or if it's appropriate for you to respond. And I'll look to the city attorney for that.
Yes, we would need to report to the council later on that specific question.
Okay, all right. And so
I do have one question, because this is public information. So there is a video that was released by the Pasadena Police Department, that is a narrative, narrated by Pasadena PPD or someone. In the office, and it's pretty much a propaganda video. I don't know why they needed to have the narration about what they believe was a gun. Which there's been lots of videos and a lot of slowdown that show that it's actually a belt buckle from the video that the city has actually produced and put out. And so why is that video still up? And also the fact that he was on parole and all of these other things about his personal life. I mean, he was a passenger in a car. He wasn't the driver. He wasn't the person that was getting pulled over. So for all fairness to the McLean family and fairness for the case, I think it's inappropriate that the city would release a video with this narration. And I have said this multiple times. I'm going to say it again, and I will continue to be the echo or a beating drum for spreading light on such a horrible thing that even our city would be involved in with releasing. The releasing of the tapes unedited, totally fine. But the edited piece of that tape, it basically is like, oh, well, he was a criminal, and that's why he got shot in the back twice.
Councilmember Hampton, just briefly, we released both the raw video as well as a critical incident video that provides context. So all of the video was available, whether it be the narrated video or the raw video.
No, it's the narrated video that I, once again, have had issue with. And the narrated video is, it's not helpful to just letting people come to the facts and conclusions on their own. The police department is, or whoever put that video together, has come to these conclusions, and basically we're calling his, I mean, it's your video. I mean, it's the city's video. There's so many stills that show that he had a belt on that was it has a D and a K on it, and that belt is what reflected in the light from the police
Perhaps
car,
before-
and not a matte black. No, I'm sorry, not a matte black gun. The purpose of a matte black gun, I'm not a, I'm not
Excuse,
a physicist or anything like that, but I tell you, the purpose of a matte black gun is to not
can stay vital and have a significant role in the community. So, as you know, churches have historically provided kinds of things, hospitals, schools, retirement communities. So it's only natural that churches would want to do this. So I want to say a huge thanks first to Vice Mayor Andy Wilson for bringing this to the City Council, and also for Mayor Victor Gordo for saying that he would talk to the city staff about this and getting it back on the City Council agenda. So we just appreciate each of you and your commitment to our city's housing vision for a decent home that all can afford within our city. So thank you.
Thank you. We will bring in Heavenly Hughes, followed by Bert Newton.
Ms. Hughes, welcome.
Ms. Hughes, there you go.
Hello, Mayor Victor Gordo and Pasadena City Council. Thank you for giving me this moment to speak. I truly appreciate the words of Tyrone Hampton, speaking clearly what the community also wants answers to and would like to see the a release of the videos that is not narrated by the police department, because you guys the police is guiding us to believe what they want us to believe. I really came on here because I read the article release stating that Chief Perez was going to resign, and we asked that the chief resign now. Why are we waiting 6 months for him to resign? I asked that Steve Mermel do not allow for Chief Perez or whoever it is necessary to hold accountable for the murder of Anthony McLean and for the violent, brutal beating of Chris Ballou, that you all do not let them slip away without being held accountable. Again, I would like for you all to please check out our page, My Tribe Rise, that has a toolkit for justice for Anthony McLean and justice for Chris Ballou, so you all can see the community's wishes and demand for transparency and accountability. And not only for accountability within the police department, but also accountability for our city employees, for those who work for the city of Pasadena, including Steve Mermel, including those who are voices for the community, which we believe are the city council members. Mayor Victor Gordo, he's here to represent the community, is what my understanding. And so if you look
1 minute.
If you look up the toolkit, Justice for Anthony McLean, it will give you the voices and the demands of the community, making it really plain and simple of how we, the community, want to see our leaders proceed when it comes to accountability and transparency. I agree completely also with what Alan Shea brought up about transparency regarding the videos related to the officer involved fatal shooting of Anthony McLean. And I also want to touch quickly on, we would like to see the
10
budget
seconds.
making it, when I'm hearing that it's on the agenda about $5.2 million that the police wants to allocate to more, to additional ways to basically spy on the community. I feel like there's already these vehicles, that they're requesting. I'm forgetting right now what they called it.
Your time was expired. Sorry.
So I'll
wrap
just
it up.
finish off saying thank you very much, Mayor Victor Gordo, for this opportunity. Thank you, Pasadena City Council. Please be sure to look up the Justice for Anthony McLean Toolkit. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Hughes.
Thank you. The final speaker on public comment on matters not on the agenda is Bert Newton. Mr. Newton, press *6 to unmute your phone. There you go. You may proceed.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Good evening, Mayor and City Council. I'm here again to ask that rezoning of church land be put back on the City Council agenda. The Planning Department has been doing work on this for many months. The Planning Commission has looked at it. The Council has looked at it. And as I understand it, Andy Wilson asked for it to be back on the agenda. I think it was back in the fall. I could be forgetting the time frames, but I think it was back in the fall. But it was put off into the housing element. My understanding is that nothing in the housing element will be put into effect until next year. So to put it off into the housing element was to delay it for a year. Also, the task force, I don't think will have the scope or time to work out those details as it works out on the housing element and affordability challenge generally. We have one church almost ready to go with 52 units. There may be more churches coming along soon. So we need this housing as soon as possible. I appreciate all the City Council has done and all the units we have in the pipeline, but as you know, we need more because of forces generally in the economy. And so, yeah, anyway, I appreciate everything the council is doing, but I really request that this be put back on the City Council agenda as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
Mayor?
Mr. Vice Mayor Wilson?
As you know, this did come up during last City Council meeting, and I think you and the city manager were going to see if there's a way to kind of separately track this so that we could try to move this forward more quickly than the updated housing element. And I'll just remind both of you that the community is eager, obviously, and I think Councilmember Hampton also offered to have it come through EdTech if that's appropriate. So we're eager to get to work on this. And please, City Manager, whatever you can do to move this forward, I know we're eager to lean in on making this happen.
Yeah, we'll provide an update. I will say that I've heard from varying points of view, and whatever we do, we have to get it right, and we have to make sure that the legal issues are run to ground. What is a church may not always remain a church, all of the complications that come with it. And so, not every church is located outside of a neighborhoods, some are within neighborhoods, and so this, a one-size-all-fits approach may not be in the city's best interest.
Excuse me, Mayor, as a reminder, it would be appropriate to discuss any further issues with respect to that when it's on the agenda.
I hear you, Mr. Wilson. Let me provide the council with an update, or ask the city attorney to do so.
And I think, to your point, it is complicated, so the sooner we could get to work on resolving those issues, the sooner we're gonna have an effective policy.
Yeah, the work hasn't stopped. Okay.
Mayor, there was a late submitted speaker card for public comment on matters not on the agenda. Do you want to take that up?
Yes.
So we're gonna recognize Jasmine and bring her into the meeting.
Okay. Ms. Richards, welcome.
Ms.
Hey,
Richards?
Mayor, how you doing?
Good, how are you?
I'm good. I just wanted to, actually just keep on voicing that we want, Steve Ramel fired, as well as, Edwin Dumagwindon. I see that you guys are taking accountability and having John Perez, resign, but that is not enough. We want Steve Ramel, we want him fired. Why? Because, we know that this city council oversight, the oversight board that you guys are having, he has all authority over this oversight board. We want a full-time mayor. Why do we want a full-time mayor? Because then the person that's over the oversight board will be accountable to the people. Since Steve Ramel is selected and not elected by the people, he does not have to be accountable to the people. And so, time and time again, we even have John Perez in the news outlet story that came out. He's saying a job well done for Steve Ramel. And we know that this is not, Steve Ramel is not a job well done. So we want the city council to actually fire Steve Ramel. We're asking 5 city council members to vote on firing him. And we asking you guys to do what the community wants you guys to do, which is, hold people accountable. And that's to start at the top down. Edwin Dumagwindon, he should not be working right now. He should be fired. And after we have a petition out to fire Steve Ramel as well as Edwin Dumagwindon, we're going to deliver the one for Edwin Dumagwindon to Gaston, and we will be delivering the petition to fire Steve Ramel to you guys. And we're asking that you guys do what the community wants. Thank you for hearing me out, and you guys have a blessed day, okay?
Thank you, Ms. Richards.
Thank you. That completes all the speaker cards submitted for public comment on matters not on the agenda.
Next, we'll move on to, again, item 10 has been pulled from the agenda. I announced that at the beginning of the meeting, and that will go through Municipal Services Committee and wind its way back to the council for a recommendation. That should, I believe that there's a deadline. Am I correct about that, Mr. City Manager, associated with this contract?
Yes, Mayor, I think our current contract expires June 30th.
And so we'll ask MSC and the chair to expedite the hearing of this matter and have it be back before us in a timely manner before the end of the contract. Thank you.
Mayor,
Yes.
very quickly, I know that the chief had mentioned some of the public comments talked about the chief resigning at the end of the year. And maybe I missed it in the first 15 minutes. Maybe the city manager mentioned something about the national search for a new police chief. I believe that search should start now with the most amount of time so that we can get the best candidate we possibly could get in the city of Pasadena, for the city of Pasadena. So I would like to know what the time frame is and when that will be going out.
Noted. Agreed. Okay. Thank you. And so we'll ask the city manager to inform us on what he intends to be the process and timing.
And also during that process, city manager, just FYI, since we have a commission that's in place, I believe that since we have community members that are part of hiring sometimes, or in most cases, except our fire chief in the most recent case, that our community members are involved in the hiring process. I think the commission commissioners or some of the, subset of the commissioners should be involved in the hiring of the new police chief. Thank you.
Kennedy?
I'd just like to piggyback on Councilmember Hampton's last part of what he just shared, which was that the commission would be engaged in some way. At this point, I hope that we can move forward with the impaneling of all the commissioners. And at this point, the commissioners that need to be impaneled are the last 8 from the council. So if we could do that expeditiously and separate the IPA appointment, I think it would do us well as a council and a community. Thank you.
The council will make its appointments consistent with the initial action of the council, and we approved it. And I think I provided an update in my weekly letter where we are. Hopefully we can get that done as quickly as possible, Mr. Kennedy. I agree that we need to get moving on that. In terms of hiring, I'll ask the city attorney to advise the city manager and all of us at a later date on the hiring process, what the charter allows, doesn't allow. There are powers, if you will, that are very clearly outlined in the charter, as well as our municipal code that we do adhere to. Okay.
Mayor, please, as it relates to just the impaneling of just the commission itself, I missed it. I thought I
provided it. May have been the week before. No, it was this week. We can communicate offline on that, Mr. Kennedy. I understand the point.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Mayor. It is important. Thank you.
Thank you. We did. I'm pretty sure I included it in there, but we can connect. Okay. Next, again, item 10 is pulled from the agenda, and we will proceed to item
9.
11.
Item 9.
I'm sorry. Did I skip 9?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. So this is, go ahead, Mr. Clerk. This is a public hearing. Mr. City Clerk will open the public hearing.
This is the time and place for the public hearing on the city manager's recommended fiscal year 2022 to 2026 capital improvement program budget and adoption of fiscal year 2022 to 2026 capital improvement program budget. On April 15th, 2021, the public hearing notice was published in the Pasadena Press. 21 letters were received from the city clerk's office regarding this item, and they varied in content, so I have a brief statement to read about them. 9 letters were received urging the city to allocate funding for 2 projects, including the recommended capital improvement program budget, traffic signals at Orange Grove and Craig Avenue, and Orange Grove and Sunny Slope Avenue. 1 letter stating opposition to the aforementioned projects and concerns with, quote, overbuilding in Pasadena. 5 letters in opposition to utilizing general fund monies for the renovation of the Pasadena Police Building and construction of a mobile command center truck, and recommending that the city use these funds to address issues such as homelessness and other crises resulting from COVID-19 pandemic. 4 letters providing comments and suggestions and expressing concerns regarding the CIP budget as it relates to water related projects. For example, the Arroyo Seco Canyon project. 1 letter recommending that all projects related to the Pasadena bicycle program and bike lane improvements be suspended until a bicycle safety and outreach program is reviewed by the public and successfully implemented. And 1 letter providing comments regarding the Pasadena Public Library and its unexpected closure and the unfunded line item, quote, Central Library Restoration, end quote, urging the council to do whatever is necessary to reopen the Central Library. Those comments were distributed to the city council, posted online, and are part of the public hearing record for this item. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Why don't we go ahead and turn it over to the city manager for opening remarks.
Thank you, Mayor. We do have a PowerPoint presentation that they're bringing up. I'm going to start off by doing a presentation, and then when we get into some of the particular sections, I'll turn it over to the respective department director. So thank you. This is the public hearing on the recommended FY22 to 26 capital improvement program budget. Our capital budget is best thought of really our long-term investment in the city's infrastructure, rolling stock, and other capital expenditures. This is separate from the operating budget, which we will present next week, which pays for the ongoing day-to-day operations of city departments. And so we're asking that you open the public hearing on the CIP budget, and we're hopeful that the council may adopt the budget this year, knowing that at any time the council can return and amend the budget. Additionally, the council's finance committee routinely receives progress reports on the status of the projects in the CIP. In the current CIP, we have over 200 active projects with estimated costs of $1 billion. We've appropriated nearly $460 million to date on this long list of projects. Before you, the capital improvement budget for this year is recommending just shy of $92 million in appropriations. But as we'll get into in a few minutes, virtually all of this is coming from non-general fund sources, except for in some very limited instances. We have 122 projects that are recommended to receive funding. Virtually all of these are ongoing projects. Most of these projects take multiple years to complete. There are 12 new projects, which today's presentation will focus on. Prior to COVID-19, after voters approved Measure I, we were very hopeful that after many years of not having general fund dollars to put into the budget, that we would be able to start making those investments for the benefit of the public watching. Certain expenditures of the city can only be funded with general fund dollars. For instance, rehabilitating our fire stations or our libraries would need to be supported by the general fund. And in FY20, thankfully, because of voter support, we were able to appropriate $9.6 million of general fund money into the capital improvement program budget. Going into FY21, we had programmed another $8.5 million, but unfortunately, because of the COVID-related recession, we had to back those dollars out and reallocate it to the operating budget to avoid making devastating cuts in city services. And we'll review what those projects would have been in just a moment. And for FY22, because of ongoing fiscal challenges, we are not in a position to allocate any Measure I money into the CIP. And so virtually none of that really sort of three-legged stool of Measure I, a portion for operating, a portion that was is sent to the school district per Measure J, and then a portion for capital, we're not able to allocate to the capital budget this year. This is this slide shows you all the projects that had been recommended for funding and were included in the FY21 CIP. As the city clerk indicated, we've received some public correspondence about the traffic signals at Orange Grove and Craig, and the traffic signal at Orange Grove and Sunny Slope. Last fiscal year, we did plan to implement those traffic signals, but sadly, along with the other millions of dollars, we had to reallocate to the operating budget. This chart shows what our total appropriations are by category. As is typical, most of the investments in the CIP are coming from the city's business operations, the power division, or in this case, it's represented as the electric system, and then the water system. Also, appropriations to municipal buildings and facilities, some to parks and landscapes and transportation, and then a little bit here and there, sewers and storm drains. Each one of these has their own dedicated funding source. Appropriations by fund fairly mirror the appropriations because we appropriate out of the funds and it goes in to support the various projects. You can see that we're receiving federal and state grants for a little bit more than $11 million. The ratepayers and the power fund and the water fund fund those respective projects. We continue to utilize funding in the underground utility fund, even though the city council rebated over $11 million to ratepayers to help cushion the blow of the economic downturn. We do still have projects that we're able to fund with that revenue source. And so now I'm going to focus on the projects that we've added. And again, the rest of the budget is largely a continuation of what we've been doing, although staff is on hand to answer any questions about any project. And again, the CIP is routinely reviewed by the Finance Committee, and the Finance Committee receives updates on project completion. And at any one of those meetings, we're also happy to go into details on those projects. But I'm going to present the first two. And so the presentation from here on out focuses on the 12 new projects with recommended appropriations of just under $24 million. The other 195 existing projects are all carryover from prior CIPs. They've previously been reviewed and approved by the city council, in some cases numerous times. And those projects are receiving $68 million in appropriations. And then any significant changes from last year are included in the staff report as attachment C. In some instances, we've had to update the estimated cost of projects as more information is known. And so now to review the new projects, I'm going to handle for the police department. The first item is a project that is police department building renovation. The police building is over 30 years old, and like any building over time, the systems need to be updated and refreshed and improved. Increasingly, we have a greater gender diversity in our workforce. We need to make sure that our locker rooms and other areas are appropriate. And this is not a request to dip into fund balance in the general fund. This is the police chief managing his budget because he recognizes the shortcomings in the building that need to be addressed. So he and I had a conversation, and I told him, if you can identify savings, if you can underspend, we'll reinvest that money into the building. It is a municipal building. It's not the police department building, it's the city's building. And just like all city buildings, it needs update, it needs maintenance, it needs to be kept in good repair. And so this would be a series of phased interior renovations and improvements throughout the department to better serve the needs of the people working in the building and the people that come to visit the building. We're asking for just the first year appropriation because it's really based on what sort of savings we can achieve operationally. So that's the first item. I think what we should do is probably go through the slides because again, there's only 12 projects and then we can take questions on any of them. The second item from the police department is a mobile operations center. And while it's ostensibly for the use of the police department, what we've seen this past year is there's many instances where it would help the city to be able to operate in a remote fashion. And so the recommended appropriations here are $900,000 from asset forfeiture. This is an allowable use of those funds. And then again, another $1.3 million in savings from within the department's budget. And this would provide for a new operations center with a video downlink so we could essentially operate as we operate in our EOC, but in a remote fashion. Over the last year, there's been any number of times that it would have been handy to have a mobile operations unit. We did have our existing unit out at La Pintoresca Park, and I think we actually towed it there because it's not very operable. We've moved it now into the library's parking lot to make sure we can provide adequate security for the library, and we'll be talking more about that later. But using a vehicle like this for community outreach, because of COVID, we had a couple of instances where potentially we could not operate from within the police department. Obviously, in the wake of a natural disaster, an earthquake, or at the scene of a fire or other calamity, it's very beneficial to have remote access and the ability to operate. Every year that we have the Rose Parade, the federal government brings similar equipment out because it supports their operations. And it is something that I think a city of this size and this complexity, with all the events we have at the Rose Bowl, with all the events we have in the city, really could benefit from. So again, it would have the ability to support many other city department operations. I want to make it clear that it would not just be solely a police use exclusively. I'm going to turn it over to Ara Malloyan to walk through the 4 projects from the Public Works Department, and then he'll hand it off, I think, to the Transportation Department. So we'll just go through the rest of the projects sequentially.
It's okay. They can change. Honorable Mayor and council members, this is Ara Malloyan. I'll go over 4 proposed new projects for Department of Public Works. Next slide, please. The first proposal is a roof replacement at Hill Avenue Library and Victory Park Recreation Center. Its total estimated cost is $600,000. Basically, this project would replace the roof at Hill Avenue Library and also Victory Park Recreation Center Administration Building. Next slide, please. As City Manager mentioned, municipal buildings get old. We are recognizing that the City Hall has been in service for 15 years now. We're proposing that we do an assessment of existing systems in City Hall, which is the HVAC system, electrical system, and other systems to make sure that we have a management system or a replacement program for City Hall. This is only $75,000, and we hope that we can complete this assessment in a year, and then appropriately we'll have a replacement program in the future CIP budget. Next slide, please. Again, this is an unfunded project we're trying to bring to the city's attention, and that we have underground storage tanks that they have ultimately they have a shelf life and they need to be replaced. We have identified 3 different locations within the city that these tanks need to be replaced. One is in a police department building, the other one is at Fire Station 33 and Civil Defense. These tanks are all reaching their useful life, and we are currently doing an assessment of these tanks, and we'll have a pretty good idea next year as what the scope will be for these tanks. And our estimate at the moment is $6 million based on what we have learned as of today. Next slide, please. Central Library restoration. As we were assessing the building, we have done a complete analysis of the systems in the library, which includes the air conditioning and heating systems, fire sprinkler and electrical fire alarm systems. Our estimated cost was $30 million. We're proposing this as an unfunded CIP, which gives us a bookmark to be able to perform more analysis when it's needed. Mayor and honorable council members, this concludes Public Works' four projects. I will now invite the Director of Transportation Department, Ms. Cornejo, to propose her projects.
Mr. Malloy, before you do that, I just have a quick question on the central library. The 30 million you identified for the central library, that number is associated with costs known costs prior to the discovery of the structural deficiencies. Is that correct?
Yes, Mayor, you're absolutely correct. This was before we discovered that the building was not reinforced. Obviously, we're doing an assessment and we'll have cost estimates that what it will entail to reinforce the building. But the assessment that you have seen, the description of the project is purely non-structural renovation and modification to the systems in the library.
And depending how we proceed, I mean, obviously it's premature to guess or speculate as to how that budget may change, but it may change. Certainly it's going to go up, but it may change in our approach to, whether we replace systems, fix systems. I don't know. I mean, it sounds like it's going to be a much more, well, it doesn't sound like it. It is going to be a much more involved project than we initially anticipated. Do you have an idea of initial timing when you might be able to come back and report to us on the scope of the problem and possible solutions to the central library?
Thank you, Mayor. This is Steve. Let me jump in. It's a good time to cover this. Again, we were all very shocked with the information we found out recently about the unreinforced masonry status of the Central Library. Since that time, Ara and his staff have been checking other buildings in the city, older buildings, just to make sure we don't have any other issues. That work is ongoing. As it relates to the Central Library, we have had one structural engineer perform a Tier 3 analysis. We will be bringing on an additional or a peer review to take a look at the analysis performed by the first engineering firm and to make their own independent assessment. We expect to have that done in a reasonable amount of time. That's probably weeks to have that completed. The first company, KPFF, had actually started to develop proposed solutions to strengthen the building. The good news is that the building can be retrofitted. So they will complete that work. We will have more analysis on that. Ultimately, we will report back to the City Council about what it would take to retrofit the building. I don't want to hazard a guess, but I think the sort of the bookmark number, as Ara referred to it, is going to certainly double, if not more. And obviously, we'll have a new revised project that would be the seismic retrofit and building upgrade of the Central Library. And so as that information is available, we'll bring that back to the council. Again, what's in the CIP right now is a purely unfunded project. It's just recognition that we do have an issue with one of our most iconic buildings. And as more information comes available, we'll share that with the council. And obviously, we'll need to identify a funding plan, assuming that we do move forward with retrofitting the building.
Thank you. Okay, we'll move on to Department of Transportation.
Mayor, I did want to ask, I know we're talking about the Central Library right now. You mentioned the Central Library. Is the time now to ask, well, not ask a question about the Central Library, but well, actually kind of a question about the Central Library. To talk about the retrofits, or are we gonna have that discussion later?
I think we're gonna have that. I think what we're hearing is, we're still in the assessment stage. And once the scope of the work properly assessed, and the city manager will come back to us together with the staff with a recommendation. But
Okay.
at this point, it may be premature to start talking about that. What we're doing is creating a capital improvement placeholder budget item, if
Right.
you will, knowing that at some point we are going to have to do something.
So Mayor, with that being said, I know that at some point we are gonna have to do something, and I just wanna put this in the public record and make sure that it's on a city council agenda, or at least in the minutes. I would just like to mention that, when reassessing, the retrofit of the library, we look at all of the options. I do a lot of traveling, and there are a lot of buildings, historic buildings, whatnot, that are, not maybe condemned for certain floors in that building to be walked in, and they have done the proper things to keep the building upright and propped up. So I just want to make sure that we're looking at all of the options, and maybe retrofitting the whole entire library is an extremely expensive project that we don't have the funds for right now, but maybe there's a way to condemn the basements of the building and use some sort of technology and structural tie-ins to support the building up in case of a serious earthquake, just like they do when we go into museums that don't have the funds to retrofit. They do things to mitigate that for earthquakes or whatnot. So I just wanted to make sure that all of the options are looked at, and not just the one option of let's keep this building condemned for 10 plus years while we're waiting to figure out where we're going to get these funds from. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Your point is well taken. We should look at all options, and look at the immediate needs of preserving the building and possibilities. And then look at long-term also. This is an opportunity to look at the long-term in the future of library services, and how to best provide them to the residents of Pasadena. And so all of these issues should and will be on the table, because it's an important structural asset, but it's also an important educational asset. And we have quite a bit of inventory at that library that also needs to be thought about, both immediately and then also in the long term. So complicated issue. I'm sure we'll be hearing more from the city manager on the inventory, the historic structure, and then also services, and what that looks like going forward in the near term, but also then in the long term, how we provide services to the residents of Pasadena. So,
And thank you, Mayor. I just want to briefly mention that Michelle Pereira, our library director, and her staff are doing just that. Right now, they're formulating how they can continue to provide services to our community and access to the over 350,000 pieces in our collection. So while the building may be closed, the library continues to provide service. So I thank you for that.
yeah. And then there's the issue of long-term, the services that we provide. I'm certain that that's going to receive a great deal of attention as we wind our way through this process. I can see our technology guru, Mr. Wilson, already perking up. And I'm sure Ms. Williams and others will do the same. So let's continue on to Department of Transportation.
Okay. Good afternoon, Mayor, members of the City Council. This is Laura Cornejo, Director of Transportation. Before I go into the one new project that is included in our CIP for this year, I wanted to just take a moment and provide you with a broad overview of the kind of the categories within our CIP and the funding that's available for our transportation projects. So you see here that our CIP budget is divided into 3 overarching categories: active transportation and complete streets, traffic operations, traffic signals, and intelligent transportation systems. And then the third category is transit. And what you see to the right are the allocations that include this year's or the fiscal year 22 recommended allocations, with active transportation and complete streets receiving $21.8 million, traffic operations at $28.3 million, and transit at $12.3 million. In any given year, we have a number of projects, and oftentimes more projects than we have funding for. We undertake a process to identify what projects, what prioritization, and then identifying project funding for those projects. And I just want to indicate that this is not a sequential process. It is very iterative. And so start at the top, project identification. We look at, for safety and assessments, any transportation improvements that really address safety and enhance safety are at the top of our list. We identify projects based on operational analysis, and then traffic investigations that come from either the council offices or really from community members. Oftentimes those traffic investigations were able to address those issues. Sometimes they become projects that then find a home within the CIP. Prioritization, I will say, is a bit of a misnomer. Anytime there's a project in the CIP, we try to advance them at any opportunity we have, but we do look at projects based on safety, infrastructure needs, operational needs, and then equity. And lastly, project funding, where we have both local funding and grant funding. And you see here that we have a number of funding sources, but overwhelmingly our CIP projects are funded through grants. What this means is that there's very little flexibility in how we can reallocate those funds. As you can imagine, a granting agency has very specific goals and objectives for the funds that they're looking to allocate and award to cities and jurisdictions. And so what oftentimes happens is we use our local funds as a way of matching for those grant funds. And with almost 3/4 of our CIP being funded with grants, that oftentimes determines what projects are able to advance sooner rather than later. That being said, we are always looking for grant funding opportunities, and the first important step is to make sure that those projects find a home within the CIP. Next slide, please. So to that end, the one new project we have for your consideration in the fiscal year 22 CIP is a Greenway or Bike Boulevard implementation. This project builds upon the 2019 Bicycle Transportation Action Plan and also builds upon the recently completed feasibility study for these 4 Greenway corridors. It would allow us at an amount of $800,000, which is currently unfunded, to be able to complete the design of these 4 north-south corridors at El Molino Avenue between Atchison Street and Bonita Drive, Wilson Avenue between Washington Boulevard and California, Sierra Bonita between Washington Boulevard and Colorado Boulevard, and Craig Avenue between Orange Grove Boulevard and Del Mar. That completes DOT's portion of the presentation. I'll go ahead and hand it over to Water and Power.
Ms. Cornell, before you do that, what sort of public outreach has the department engaged in with regard to the Greenway implementation plan?
Sure. So the Greenways were initially identified as part of the bicycle transportation action plan, wherein we had a number of community meetings and community engagement to be able to identify those corridors, seek public input, and identify what corridors the city should consider for bicycle improvements. And so as we move forward, once funded and we get into design, we will again have community engagement moving forward.
So before we begin implementation, there will be further public outreach?
Absolutely.
it'd be helpful if you could maybe provide a schedule of outreach to each of the council members, so that we're well informed on the timing of that outreach.
Sure, and that outreach, just to be clear, once we have funding to design the corridors, that is when we will initiate the community engagement. And so once we do, we'll be sure to work with each of the district liaisons in that effort.
Let me ask a question. Why would you wait until you have funding if there's no support in the community? Why would you keep going? Why would you go further when there's other projects you could work on?
We have.
I'm not saying that there's no support in the community. I'm just trying to understand for just clarifying purposes.
Well, just to address one of those points, we have received support for building out our bicycle infrastructure within the city and making sure that we have a robust bicycle network in the city to be able to support providing alternative modes of transportation for our residents. The reason why we would hold off on, or why we need funding for the design, is we do need the support of consultants to be able to design the corridors themselves. That is what the $800,000 would allow us to do.
I think Councilmember Hampton, I'm sorry, go ahead, Mr. Hampton.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to get at. Is so, what do we not have a concept of what we want to design right now? Or are you saying that we need to have the $800,000 for that concept so that you take the concept out to the community?
We do have a concept that was developed as part of the Bicycle Transportation Action Plan. We did some additional feasibility work where we did some transportation analysis. We wanted to understand how these corridors may impact parking. We wanted to have a better idea of what the cost would be to actually build out these corridors. And so the next step is to do the design work and engage the community and really build out the design of these corridors.
Okay, and that outreach is from what year? Like recently?
So from the bicycle transportation plan, that was adopted in 2019. And so the next step in engaging the community on these specific corridors would be once we have funding for design secured.
So not waiting until after we design, just, piggyback on Mr. Hampton's point, not after we design, but we'll go to the public once we have the funding and prior to designing.
Correct. Correct.
Yeah, I think that's an important point that Mr. Hampton raises, and I'm glad to hear that we'll have a robust community engagement effort. I mean, no one's going to argue that we need that bicyclists need to be safe, that pedestrians need to be safe. That that every single one of us will argue for that, and that's appropriate. But I would like to see, as I'm hearing Mr. Hampton say, and I'm sure others, a robust outreach so that we don't find ourselves designing something that the community isn't going to embrace. I'm thinking, for example, downtown Los Angeles, where they created the green paths for bicyclists. Safety is one issue, but those designs haven't proven to be the most well. They're not very weather resistant. They've caused a lot of need to maintain them, and they're frankly not the most attractive. And so I think all of those issues need to be vetted. We need to learn from our own experience as well as the experience that other cities have had with this issue. And so I'm glad to hear that we'll be looking at all of those issues: maintenance, the design, the look, the feel, its impact to safety, of course, is paramount, but all of the other ancillary issues that I'm raising and Mr. Hampton is raising are important as well.
Absolutely. We will engage the community at every step of the way.
I would echo that, Mayor and Councilmember Hampton. I think that was one of the problems that happened with Orange Grove. We got the funding before we did the public outreach. And so I think it's very important just at this point in time very few people were involved in that bike transportation plan. It was a pretty long time ago. So I think it would be good to have some sort of outreach to the community that just talks about the projects that are coming up and gets feedback before we get the funding, just so we make sure that these are the projects where people are focused. Thanks.
Yeah, well, I think I think we're all in agreement, and I think it's consistent with what Ms. Cornejo was saying. We will go out to the public, certainly prior to implementation, and once we have the budget to go out to the public as part of the design phase. But again, I want to caution us. Let's not repeat mistakes of the past, as we saw with Orange Grove or in other cities. I would invite all of you to visit the Green Pass in downtown Los Angeles, and they're just not the most attractive. It's not the most attractive approach, and has required quite a bit of maintenance. And in some cases, the maintenance isn't being provided, so they actually take away from, in my view, others may think differently, but the aesthetics of what could be there. And so I'm not suggesting that we revisit pedestrian or bicycle safety. I'm just cautioning us to ensure we include the community and that we ensure that we're providing safety and thinking about the aesthetics as well of our affected streets and surrounding neighborhoods.
Well said, Mayor. In other words, to the public, we don't want Pasadena to look like LA.
Well, we want to learn from the mistakes that some other cities have unfortunately made, and not replicate them. But yeah, I would agree. Okay, so we'll pass it on to
Water and Power.
Water and Power.
Good afternoon, Mayor and City Council members. I'm Gurcharan Bawa with Pasadena Water and Power. I'm also joined by a number of my colleagues virtually, so should the questions get in details, I may have to seek their help. Pasadena Water and Power has 5 new projects. Chester substation to Santa Anita substation. We would like to install 34 kV cable, and that would provide for basically additional capacity, and also at the times of high amount of energy requirement, it'll provide a support to move the power from east to west within the city and vice versa. The estimated cost is $7.1 million, and the appropriation we are seeking for 2022 is $2.2 million. So the name may be a little bit misleading in this. Customer facility replacements, what it means is that when customers build something new, they have electrical installation done, they pay for all the equipment. That equipment, transformers or switches, things like those, they become, though the customer pays, but they become the asset of the PWP. And as time goes by, this equipment wears out or needs some repairs, and that is the responsibility of PWP. It's a long-established policy. We are seeking $3 million total, and the fiscal 2022 appropriation is about $600,000. Power facilities, wastewater and stormwater capture and treatment. This is a project related to the power plant. We have had some issues with the stormwater quality. We are required by US EPA to comply with certain requirements, and the compliance with the old plant has been a little bit of an issue. So what we would like to do is to study the options, and it might mean either we capture all the water, treat it on site and reuse it, and to the extent we cannot reuse, we would have to discharge it through the sewage system. We think the estimated cost is about $400,000, and the initial work in the fiscal 2022 would require $200,000. Customer information system. This is common with both water fund and the power fund. The estimated cost is $7.5 million. On a forward-going basis, this project is expected to be commissioned or go live by towards the end of this year. It'll take about 3 to 6 months to stabilize, but going forward, like with any other large IT or OT system, it's going to require upgrades and some additional IT, OT, operational technology services. We're estimating that to be $7.5 million, and the cost for 2022 that we're seeking is $500,000 from the water fund and $1 million from the power fund. That concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Bawa.
And so,
Questions, comments on this aspect? I think pretty straightforward. Thank you.
Thank you.
Vice Mayor Wilson?
I have a number of questions across the various aspects. Mayor, I don't know if this is the time to ask those.
Let's see, Mr. City Manager, does that complete all of the presentations?
yes, Mayor, those are the 12 new projects, and myself and the other staff are happy to respond to questions about them or CIP questions in general.
I think one point that's clear, and before I turn to Vice Mayor Wilson, can you turn to slide 8? I think that's that I was looking at that. It's the pie chart, Mr. City Manager, and it's different than the pie chart that we were provided. And I'm guessing it's because there have been so many questions about the use of CIP dollars. So the only general fund dollars that are going into the CIP is 2.7 million, correct?
Yes, it's the total of those two. It's 2.3 million, although this chart says 2.7. So I'll ask the staff, they can figure out what that other 400,000 is. But to your point, yes, and that was the point I made at the outset, that but for COVID, we would be recommending upwards of $8.5 million in general fund support for the capital budget. But because of the need to avoid making significant cuts in service levels, whether it be the fire department, the police department, Parks and Rec, we're using those dollars to shore up the revenue loss in the general fund.
I think the point that I'm looking to draw out is, you know, this is a big expenditure, $91 million. Obviously, we have much more needs in capital improvements than $91 million, as you pointed out at the onset of the presentation. But these are the dollars that we have now. We don't have a whole lot of discretion with regard to these dollars, with the exception of the $2.3, $2.7 million. The remainder are grant funds or dedicated funds that are restricted, whether they're gas tax dollars or residential impact fee dollars or road maintenance, underground or dollars associated with the utility. The council does not have flexibility, can't rededicate them to other services without significant action, including action by the voters. So, you know, I think that's an important point for the public to understand and for all of us to understand, that dedicated dollars are just that, dedicated, and not within the discretion of the city council to move around.
Mayor, you're absolutely right. They're not fungible across funds. Generally speaking, only general fund dollars can be utilized for any city expense. virtually all these other funding sources have legal restrictions that don't allow us to use them for other projects. So people might look at this and say, well, why are all these power fund projects more important than park projects or other things that the general fund would pay for? And the fact of the matter is we can only use the power fund money to reinvest in the power system.
Yeah. So, you know, we may have a budget of $897 million, $897.8 million. That's our total operating budget, but only 286.7 of that represents the recommended general fund. But you know, that's a discussion for the operating budget. As it relates to this budget, the capital improvement budget, the city manager is correct that, you know, we don't have a whole lot of discretion. We have discretion within the projects, but in terms of moving the dollars around, there are legal restrictions. And I would add practical restrictions. I mean, we want to have a sewer and maintenance program. We want to invest in our infrastructure and ensure that all of our infrastructure, whether it's sewers or any other part of our utility operations or infrastructure are well maintained and taken care of. That's a big part of why we exist as a municipality, is to ensure that those services are provided to the residents of our city without fail. And so whether it's utility, whether it's sewers, street maintenance, there is an expectation on the part of the residents that we provide services and provide them and do a good job providing them. So I just wanted to give some context to the discussion before we launch into questions or comments, and hopefully then proceed to approve the budget. Vice Mayor Wilson?
Thank you, Mayor. I think that was excellent context as well. I don't know if we want to take the slide down so we could get everyone.
Yeah, we were going to ask that question. We'll take the PowerPoint down now.
So I know we have been told that we are likely to receive, I think it's around $50 million from the American Recovery Act. I know Mayor Gordo and the Finance Committee has asked for a kind of allocation strategy for that. I'm just bringing that forward in the sense that we've had to take Measure I dollars and put those towards operations, and one of the considerations could be allocating some of those dollars to capital projects. As I know, we probably could spend the $50 million 10 times over, but I think we're all eager to understand what the nature of those dollars are. And what we understood, I think from Matt's brief report, there was 150 pages of limitations of uses and guidance on how those dollars could be used, but could show up here somewhere. I had some specific questions on several of the capital improvement items. I think this should be relatively short. First one was on the item 1.6, which was the roof replacements. I noticed the Hill Avenue Library is there. It kind of relates a little bit to the seismic issue. I mean, if there's a seismic challenge in that building, I guess I would make sure that we're confident that the building is going to be operable before we repair the roof. Or does that make sense?
Vice Mayor, if I may, yes, obviously we put the CIP together a little while ago. We're checking our branch libraries to see what kind of condition they're in. If it turns out that the buildings, the Hill Library or any other building, if it turns out its condition is worse than we thought when we put together the CIP, obviously it would require a rethink of the particular project. So you wouldn't put a new roof on a building that needs its walls braced. And to answer, and if I may, but I think you probably heard an answer at the Finance Committee. Finance Director Matt Hawksworth was weighing through about 150 pages of federal government regulations today. While the headline was city receives $52.2 million, now we get the fine print. And a lot of it's going to be driven by what they say we can use it for. And we'll try to find a use that allows us to maximize the allotment. So we don't want to leave any money on the table. But what we're seeing is the feds are telling us how they want to see us use that money. In some instances, we may need to come back to you and say we need to shift the source of funds to be able to access the federal money. And so there'll be more to come on that, but we're wading into it because we do want to maximize that. We want to get every dime of it.
Yeah, it totally makes sense. My first question was on the mobile command center. I would ask that, once again, maybe we can get this in a memo, is what the usage history is. You mentioned it's kind of across different areas, and I think it would be worth having that history just to know how many days it was used for what functions. I guess it's important, but there were claims that it was used beyond police on a regular basis. I think we should have that information. Central Library restoration question. I think Mayor Gorder, thank you for drilling into that. My questions were answered there. On the Greenways, the new item that Laura presented, $800,000 for design. I don't think Laura is still there. It's important for us to know what, we had this discussion before, is what the order of magnitude is of kind of the real project. You come $800,000 on a project and it's going to be, making this up, $25 million, then given the other things that are demanding capital, we're never going to do it. So my question, Laura, is what is the nature of the construction? And I know it hasn't been fully designed, but is it something that we could reasonably fund and imagine there will be grant dollars for?
Sure. So based on our initial estimates, it's looking as though fully building 8.8 miles of greenways would cost at about $8.4 million. And just to clarify, the greenways are class 3 bike facilities that have enhanced pedestrian safety infrastructure in place. So it's really the pedestrian infrastructure that makes it safer for bicyclists to be on that brings up the price tag.
And do we think it's realistic to fund that 8 million? I mean, obviously we have to have the plan, but you're pretty confident if we had
Yes.
the plan, there's funding sources for that.
Yes, we are already looking at grant funding opportunities to not just design these, but potentially also build them.
Great, thank you. Item 5.41, which is replacement of CNG standard buses. I know you're trying to hear me ask about this, but I really feel like we're coming to the point where we should be electrifying our fleet. And I always hear we're not ready. At what point do we start, biting the bullet? Because we're never, we got to make the switch at some point. So I wanted to have, what our time, I know a lot of fleets are going electric.
Yes, so I'll answer that question in two parts. One is we will be coming to MSC in late June to provide the committee with an update on our zero emission feasibility study, wherein we're looking at the different technologies available to the city and what the implications of those technologies are. And then the second part to that question is, per the state, we are required to start transitioning and purchasing zero emission buses by 2026. That being said, we don't necessarily need to wait until then. What we are doing now is making sure we have a plan in place. We've identified the infrastructure we need in order to be able to support a zero emission technology, and that's what we will be bringing to MSC next month.
I'd have to think, I know it's still a work in process, but the $1.8 trillion infrastructure project that President Biden has proposed, I think would probably potentially be a source for some of the electrification infrastructure. So I just like to flag the fact that we're still buying, I'm glad we're not buying diesel, but we're buying like natural gas and not going to electric. And I know this is two items. Item 12.2, which is the Sunset Reservoir improvements. I wanted to call that out because Councilmember Kennedy asked that that be reviewed. That is on the agenda for MSC this week to look at that more closely. John, I wanted to make sure you knew that. We're going to also review that as well. So like I said, depending on any input we have, this project may change or be subject to review of MSC. I wanted to make a similar caveat in 12.3, which is the Arroyo Seco project. We've had lots of community feedback on that project, and it's part of the Water System Resource Plan, WSRP. That plan has not been approved by this council, and this project is part of that plan. So caveat to staff and my colleagues, these two things are connected, and we need to be a little bit careful about, getting the cart in front of the horse with that project. I don't know, Paula, if you want to respond to that at all.
You're right, Vice Mayor. So this is not a new project. WSRP is a guiding document. It does not specify projects by, specifically. And so certainly it's a larger discussion, and we would bring it to the MSC and the City Council at the appropriate time as some of the other controversies get resolved.
Thank you very much, Mayor. Those are my questions and comments.
There's always an opportunity to amend should we have the need to.
Excellent, thank you.
I saw Mr. Kennedy raise his hand at some point, followed by Councilmember Masuda. Mr. Kennedy.
Thank you very much, Mayor. First, I'd like to thank the mayor and the vice mayor as it relates to the matter of the Sunset Reservoirs. There are actually two there. Some very serious questions I've raised, and I'm glad that MSC will take them up. I'd ask that you specifically take a look at the letters that I addressed to Mayor Gordo. I think it would be helpful in that look at what to do. Then, as it relates to the issue of whatever we're going to do with the police building, as it already has been stated, it's over 30 years old. I want to take responsibility for fighting for us to do something to that, to the what I would call obsolescence and just an aging infrastructure. And we know now how important that look is, given the fact that the library, the central library in my district, is under serious consideration as it relates to renovating, updating, and the council has made no decision on what is the best way forward. And I'm sure that the mayor will engage with the city manager to find the right group of individuals to help us think this through as it relates to the library. Back to the police department, I am happy that we're not asking for additional funds from the general fund or any other source other than the allocation. I'm familiar with this type of activity because when I was Deputy Chief of Police Administrative Services, one of the things was making sure that oftentimes that I could figure out how to purchase different items without increasing the overall budget. So I'm happy that staff, because I got a lot of pushback, Mayor, for even desiring when I was chair of the Public Safety Committee, and happy that you are there now. Even that discussion about the improvements and renovations that needed to take place. So I look at those renovations, and this is directly to the community, is just keeping our building status quo as it relates to when it was built. It's just decaying. And I'm sure that there are other buildings that the city manager and staff are looking at to make sure they don't fall in what we would call disrepair. So happy about that. As it relates to the discussion that we briefly had concerning the fleet and updating the model to be sensitive to our environment. I'd just like to piggyback on the Vice Mayor's comment. That's critically necessary, and I don't think we need to delay that, Vice Mayor. So if in fact that is something that's under your committee, if the mayor says it's under your committee or whatever committee, I think we do, Mayor, need to take a more critical look, if you can hear me, a more critical look on how we address the issues that the Vice Mayor raised. And I don't think we need to delay it. I think we need to do it now. And if I read it correctly, at some point, there's about a $41 million budget item. Can someone give me a little bit more background if it's appropriate?
Is it relates to item 10 that was pulled from the agenda?
Okay, Mayor, sorry about that. We're gonna have.
That's gonna go through MSC. That's been.
Oh, yeah, thank you, you're right. And I'm glad that it's going to be looked at by one of the council committees, because it's a hell of a lot of money and we need to understand it better. With that, I think Vice Mayor asked a whole host of questions that were right on point, and I'm happy about that. Now, Mayor, just a point of clarification, is it your expectation that we will do a thumbs up or a thumbs down on all the recommendations that have been made tonight?
With the understanding that there's always an opportunity to amend and come back, and I'll look to the city manager to just address that issue. So yes, my expectation is that, we will vote on the CIP this evening, allowing us to move on to the operating and the staff to move on to the operating budget, and where we do have more discretion, and put this CIP in motion. But again, in my view, it's step one of an ongoing, well, not step one, it's probably step 500 of a consistent path to invest in our infrastructure, and we can always amend if we feel the need to. Mr. City Manager?
Oh, go ahead, sorry, Mayor.
And Mayor, you are correct. Again, given the dearth of general fund dollars, there's not a lot of latitude. The vast majority of the items are carryovers, except for the 12 new projects we've identified, some of which don't even have funding. They're just being put into the book now. I want to call out that we did identify that other $400,000 of general fund money that was allocated to some work on our fire stations and bringing those up to standard. So this budget represents really just a continuation of the work we've been doing. We're hopeful that between the different forms of federal relief, we may have an opportunity to come back and take a look at some of the projects. Also, for example, the traffic signals on Orange Grove, staff is actively pursuing some grants. And so we may be able to bring those back in short order and say we did identify the means to fund them, because we do want to move on our capital needs. But in terms of where we are today, of this date, it's very straightforward. It's pretty bare bones, if you call whatever $92 million bare bones.
Okay. Mayor, I have a couple more questions, please.
Go ahead, Mr. Kennedy.
Thank you.
And then we'll turn to Mr. Masuda.
The library, I thought that Councilmember Hampton raised a legitimate possible way forward if our engineers, both internal and external, could figure out a way to ensure that we have the necessary safety of that building to keep it open, even if it's open only to certain areas, that we can achieve what state law requires related to safety. Certainly, we wouldn't want anyone visiting a building that is not structurally safe. However, as many of us have traveled the world, we have seen a number of buildings where you can enter and you can enter safely, but construction is going on at the same time as you enter the historic structure, many times much older than the buildings that you would see in the city of Pasadena, so into the multi-hundreds of years. So to the extent that staff is, I'm I'm sharing my comments to support Councilmember Hampton's comment. And to the extent we can do that, we need to bring that either through committee or directly to the city council so we can know if that request is feasible. I support the concept of what Councilmember Hampton has brought to us for consideration. I think it's a smart move if we can achieve that. And then as it relates to the 30 million for the Central Library, I am somewhat surprised by the number. The number for our residents does not include, as has been stated, what I think will be somewhere between 30 and $50 million to renovate that structure, to make it safe as it relates to reinforced masonry. So we're really talking about a range of dollars if we include the retrofit of somewhere between 50 to $80 million. So, Mayor, I'm hoping that you would give strong consideration to bring some of our friends in the city of Pasadena and outside the city of Pasadena, beyond the technical folks that we're going to hire, to help us think this through, so this will not become an albatross or the big white elephant of Pasadena. We love the library. It happens to rest in District 3, but it is an asset for the whole city and those who visit our city. And as you know, our library system is connected to library systems in neighboring cities as well. So I hope the committee who's assigned to oversee and look at this comes back expeditiously with something that would help us all think this through, however that's going to be done. I'm curious, Mayor, and I'm looking forward to your leadership and sharing with us how you would like to proceed in that manner.
And Councilmember Kennedy and Mayor Gordo, I did send an update out to the council earlier today. It's still very, very early in this process. I anticipate that we'll certainly have time to undertake all the engineering analysis necessary. Ultimately, the council will need to choose what is the right solution for the building, as was done similar for City Hall. City Hall is a different type of building than the Central Library, but my recollection is there were a lot of different possible approaches. Ultimately, the city settled on base isolation. There was an oversight committee. I've been very gratified at the people who've stepped forward. We've had a number of conversations with very prominent members of our community already. This will be a lengthy project, but we're off to a good start in terms of support. I would ask the council to take a look at the information I sent earlier today, and there'll be many opportunities to discuss how we proceed with the library.
And my last observation, Mayor and colleagues, is that in the city of Pasadena, we are fortunate to have a number of billionaires who may be interested in assisting us with paying for the retrofit of the library, our central library. And I would say, in most of our outreach and asking our residents, it hasn't, or a major gift of any kind, has not been consistent. Some have happened, but they're generally smaller than, much smaller than 50 million. And the 50 million price tag is my number, and it's just born out of limited experience. But I hope that we would do appropriate outreach and have those conversations at the mayoral level with the number of billionaires that happen to live in the Pasadena. This would be extraordinary, and I've seen others around the world step up in crisis like this, and the Central Library is so important to who we are as a city. And one huge project comes to mind, and that is, of course, Notre Dame in Paris, because it was extraordinarily damaged through a fire. And folks in that community stepped up in a huge way and have raised into the hundreds of millions of dollars And so I want to just say to my friends and the residents of the city of Pasadena, if you have those kinds of contacts, given where we are in our budget, to attract that kind of resource, I think all of the members of the city council and the mayor would certainly be gratified that some of you have really just said this is so important that we're going to make a significant contribution to the effort. Thank you, Mayor, for the opportunity to share.
Thank you. It's the first step is to assess, but I agree with you that there's an important role for residents to play. We've seen success at the Rose Bowl through Legacy, where that group has raised over $36 million in commitments. And so people obviously care about our historic institutions in Pasadena, and we'll certainly provide an opportunity for people to be more involved in the preservation of our historic facilities, like we did with the Rose Bowl. We didn't have a whole lot of success with City Hall, but I think that was a different situation, a different time, and hopefully we're all correct that people will want to play a part in preserving not just an important building, but an important part of our central district. I'm sorry, of our civic center, and a very, very important part of our civic center. So it's, you know, it's an important spoke in the wheel. So more to come. Councilmember Masuda.
Thank you, Mayor. And I wanted to thank Mr. Mermel and our Transportation Director, Director Cornejo, for bringing up the signal, that long discussion about the signal on Craig and Orange Grove, and bringing it out of design and finally getting it funded. Those of you that have been on council for a long time, like Mayor Gordo, that has been a big problem for such a long time. At that curve there at Craig and Orange Grove, there's been a lot of accidents. There was an accident of a man on a motorcycle that died. There was a lady and her child that was she was going to Assumption Church then, school, and they passed away. And then recently, last year, at that curve, a lady hit a pole and died. So it's great news that it's getting out of design and finally getting done. But going back even further, I went to a meeting where the transportation director, Fred Dock, had a meeting with the neighborhood there. And he was talking about how it was important to have a signal there. And it was funded, I think. I think it was funded. And he was begging the neighborhood to let's have that signal. And they were saying no. I mean, have you heard that before? They say no. And so I'm glad that finally, you know, attitudes and opinions are changing, and it'll finally be there, hopefully soon, and we can have a place that's very safe. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Masuda. Councilmember Rivas.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to start by thanking the staff for providing such helpful information today and over the last week or so, and also all the documents prepared. It's been very helpful to me as a new council member. It's been a lot to digest, so I really appreciate it. I also wanted to thank all of my colleagues for asking such helpful questions. You essentially hit all the topics I wanted to address. But I just had one question for the city manager. A few moments ago, you mentioned that $400,000 for the fire department would come from the general fund. Is that a new project or an old project? Because I didn't see it reflected on attachment B, which is for a new project. So I just want to get clarification on that.
It's an existing project, and I can have Public Works come up. So I think it's the second year of a multi-year project. Here
Okay, that's helpful. I just was unsure if it was a new project because it wasn't on attachment B. So that answers my question.
Thank you. It's fun to watch Ara jump up and run to the podium.
Yeah, that was a good rewind of.
Sorry to make him get up and down.
Okay, so.
Mayor, did you want to go to public comment?
Yeah, why don't we, unless there are other comments or questions, why don't we move on? We have 5 public comment cards. Is that correct, Mr. Clerk?
That's correct. The first speaker will be Robert Karatsu, followed by Sonia Burnt, followed by Breathe Justice, followed by Jasmine Abdullah Richards, and followed by Adriana Bautista. So we'll bring in Robert Karatsu first. Mr. Karatsu, could you please unmute your mic? And your 3 minutes are starting now.
Okay, thank you very much, Honorable Mayor and the City Council. As the chair of the Pasadena Public Library Commission, but more important, as a resident, a 20-plus year resident of the city of Pasadena, I was, like most, quite shocked when informed that the Pasadena's iconic Central Library would be closed indefinitely. I noticed that as a part of this evening's agenda was approval of the 2022 to 26 Capital Improvement Program budget. And while looking through the different documents, I did notice that attachment B makes reference to an unfunded line item for Central Library restoration. And I realized at the moment there are still so many unknowns regarding the solution to bringing the Central Library back online. But this unfunded mandate could potentially be an opportunity to fund some kind of analysis for what it will indeed cost to restore the Central Library. So, after listening to the meeting and many of your comments, thank you so much for your attention in this matter. I know the citizens of the great city of Pasadena knows that the leadership of the City Council will do whatever is necessary to reopen the Central Library. Thank you all so much. Respectfully, Robert Karatsu.
Thank you, Mr. Karatsu.
Thank you. We'll bring in Sonia Burnt, followed by Breathe Justice.
Ms. Burnt, welcome.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of the City Council. My comments tonight supplement the concerns expressed in a letter that I submitted a week ago. The request to approve $5.2 million to remodel the police department building and construct the truck should raise serious concerns from the council for several reasons. First, 83% of the money requested to fund these 2 new projects would come from our city's general fund, which funds numerous critical city programs. Second, the proposed budget for these 2 projects is huge and is not justified by the documents given to the public to review. There is a notation in attachment D that $2.3 million in savings from the fiscal year 2021 operating budget will help to fund the project. It is not clear to the public whether those savings were from the police department's fiscal year 2021 operating budget. Even assuming they were, that is less than 1/2 of the total dollars requested for the remodel and the truck. Further, I'm not aware of any requirement that any such operational savings must be used to remodel a building rather than provide basic shelter for our unsheltered residents or to fund other programs that would benefit our most vulnerable residents. Third, the projects do not meet the specified qualifications for the capital improvements program. According to the city's project description of the quote, police department building renovation, unquote, the remodel includes, quote, creating a more open floor plan, unquote, painting, upgrading flooring, a new kitchen, and new furniture and computers. The description does not show the public that $3 million are needed to address a particular safety issue, or that existing maintenance efforts are no longer satisfactory, or that the building is no longer adequate to meet the demands of the city. Finally, our city should be prioritizing investing in people rather than expensive building remodel, especially as we emerge from the pandemic. We have over 500 unhoused residents living in our city, nearly 300 of which spend every night sleeping outside. They deserve decent, basic shelter and services. I urge the council to reject the items in the proposed CIP budget related to the police department building remodel and truck, and instead find ways to fund basic shelter and services for our most vulnerable residents. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bird. Next.
Breathe Justice, followed by Jasmine Abdullah Richards, followed by Adriana Bautista. We'll bring. All right, your 3 minutes are starting now.
Welcome.
Thank you
for the opportunity to speak. We're a collective of Pasadenans striving for justice and equality in our city. There's been an awful lot of talk about police accountability from our community members, many of you council members, and even the police chief. Accountability is rooted in truth and transparency. Regarding the $5.2 million capital improvement project proposed by the Pasadena Police Department, we have the following questions and respectfully ask that you provide the community with answers prior to voting on these projects. One, as someone astutely already asked, what are the statistics on the current mobile command center? For instance, how often is it used? For what specific purposes? Two, what evidence do we have to show that without a new command center, crime will increase? Three, what specific technological upgrades are being requested for the mobile command center? And how will these impact the civil liberties of our residents? Four, where are the reports and data on the state of the Pasadena Police Department facilities and need for remodeling? Where are the bids to show costs for proposed improvements and upgrades? Five, where exactly did the savings from the police department budget come from? Was the initial budget overestimated? And is it appropriate to spend operating budget fund savings on capital improvement projects? Six, although it is permissible to utilize money from asset forfeiture for these projects, is it proper, ethical, and acceptable to the Pasadena community? We're simply asking for detailed information, data, statistics, and justification for these police department capital improvement program projects. As we begin to potentially emerge from this deadly pandemic, we find that many Pasadena residents have lost their homes and livelihoods. We're far from our goal of reaching a community fully vaccinated against COVID-19. If the statistics show that the mobile command center is primarily used for community coffees and neighborhood gatherings, couldn't we be better served by using operational budget funds to have these gatherings within local coffee shops around the city? This would enable us to invest in local businesses while simultaneously improving community relationships with our police department. Finally, wouldn't our community be better served by using capital improvement program project funds to reimagine and convert the mobile command center into a functional, full-time mobile COVID-19 vaccination center? Once our community COVID-19 vaccination goals have been reached, the community mobile unit could subsequently be used to provide flu and other vaccinations, or even as a mobile mental health center to better serve our community. These are just a few considerations we have as we strive for a strong, healthy, and united Pasadena. We understand wholeheartedly that reimagining the proposed projects in this manner would require additional time and effort on all of your behalf and on the community's behalf, but we believe our community is worth it. We earnestly hope you will provide the community with answers to these questions prior to voting or approving the proposed capital improvement program projects. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you, ma'am. Next.
We have Jasmine Abdullah Richards, followed by Adriana Bautista. We'll bring in Ms. Richards.
Hello, City Council. How y'all doing? I just wanted to comment on the $2.2 million that's going towards the mobile command center. Now, I've only seen this command center used one time this year, and that's when they sat out in front of the Anthony McLean vigil. I actually know that this mobile command center is never used. It's only used to come to Northwest Pasadena. And that $2.2 million can go elsewhere. It can go towards community-ran youth groups like Black Lives Matter Pasadena Freedom School, which is funded by the community. So instead of the community having to fund it, you guys will fund it. And I also want to talk about how the Pasadena Police Department can always use the general fund at will, but every other department has to pull money from other places. Why is that? We need to start looking at why PPD can use the general fund at will. So thank you for letting me speak on that.
Thank you.
Bautista?
Yes, we'll bring in Adriana Bautista. If you can unmute Ms. Batista? Ms. Batista, if you can unmute. There you go. All right, here you go. Your 3 minutes starts now.
Okay. I'd like to point out that the police department's capital improvements are the only improvements among dozens, nearly 100, if I've counted correctly, of proposed citywide improvements that are using general funds as their proposed allocated monies. The only 2 using the general fund out of nearly 100. The police department should submit a legitimate capital funding plan, such as state CIP grants or other funding that are used like all the other departments do. Unlike Councilmember Kennedy, I am unhappy that the police department, with full-blown support from City Manager Mermel, is using general funds. Why is it that surveillance technology passed several months ago was prioritized before their building maintenance and emergency response vehicle? Also, I noticed that they used the phrase mutual aid in the command center. I am unaware of any mutual aid distributed by the police department's mobile command center. I also believe Pasadena needs to be more serious and invest in an actual emergency command unit that can address wildfire, earthquake, and other such community emergency services outside of the Pasadena Police Department. As let's face it, I think the PPD would do a terrible job of providing generally needed emergency services to city residents. That's not their specialty. Please do not approve the police department's request. The police department and Mermel have refused to find funding for community-based services. They've been buying their surveillance and military-grade equipment without so much as a blink from City Council. They need to prioritize their $91 million+ budget. Do not try to tuck the police department's irresponsible spending into this blank authority expenditure. The other departments have been responsible enough to identify
45 seconds.
Please re-agendize this item with more details that are submitted to the public as attachments prior to the meeting, in a general meeting, not a special meeting. I am not falling for Mermel's tomfoolery. Mermel, do your job and stop letting the PPD dip into the general fund whenever they want. City Council, stop letting Mermel and PPD abide by the lowest bar possible. After all, general funds are our dollars as city residents, not yours. Thank you.
Mayor,
Thank you, Ms.
Mayor,
Mr. Kennedy?
can staff quickly define the reference by staff in any report related to mutual aid? Can you do that real quick?
Sorry?
Yes,
Do
thank you.
understand?
Yes, thank you,
Right.
Councilmember Kennedy. Mutual aid is when the city responds in support of other jurisdictions. We do it with the police department and we do it with the fire department quite frequently. If we have an incident in our city, we may call other cities to come and assist. And likewise, when other neighboring jurisdictions have an issue, let's say a large fire, they may call us to go and assist. The same thing happens with our police department. We're one of the larger agencies in this part of the San Gabriel Valley. So we provide support to neighboring jurisdictions. That's what mutual aid is. It's essentially helping your neighbor.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, that completes public comment. I did have a follow-up on, and Mr. Masuda raised it, the importance of the traffic signals at Craig and Orange Grove, as well as Sunny Slope and Orange Grove. And, you know, Mr. Masuda raises the incident involving someone who was then a young man on a motorcycle. And, you know, I attended high school with that young man. It was not too long after that he ran into the back of a car on the curb. exiting the curve at Orange Grove, and so I'm very familiar with the problem there. So, Mr. City Manager, this is a safety issue. It's an important issue to this part of our city. What are the plans for fully funding both of these projects? My understanding is from you is that we believe we can accomplish it through grants and hopefully do that soon. Maybe you can provide us with an update on both of those projects.
Yeah, I'd like Laura Cornejo to step up. I have asked the staff to explore what other options we have, and we do think either directly through some grants or some reallocation from some projects that would receive grants, thus freeing up money. But let me defer to Laura for more detail.
Sure. So, Mayor, we were recently notified of grant funding that we received for our RRFB lights and some other pedestrian enhancements at Orange Grove and Sunny Slope. So while it's not a traffic signal per se, they are pedestrian improvements that we think would go a long way to helping the situation. That being said, we continue to look for grant funding for that particular location. We are also actively working on a grant application for the Orange Grove and Craig location to be able to fund a traffic signal at that location. And actually that grant resolution will be coming before City Council in a couple of weeks for your consideration. Lastly, per Mr. Mermel's, as he just indicated, we are looking at grant funding for other projects that would potentially free up traffic impact fee funds that we could then reallocate towards these two traffic signals. So we're constantly looking at where there are opportunities to either move funds that we can move around or to pursue grants so that we can fully fund these two locations.
I think, well, one, let's see what you report to us in a couple of weeks, but, this is one of the most important uses of capital improvement dollars is safety. And if not the most important use. And both of these intersections are in need of investment and safety improvements. So let's see, we should prioritize these projects as it relates to funding that's released, if you will, because of grant dollars. And if we aren't able to prioritize and we don't receive grants, then I do think we should consider an amendment and move dollars from projects that are nowhere near the funding that's needed, and we have dollars just sitting around. I think when it comes to safety, we should act swiftly. And so let's wait to see what staff comes up with. But I do suggest to the council that if we aren't able to achieve the grant funds and we aren't able to rededicate dollars, then we ask the city manager to come back to us with an alternative to fund both of these projects. They've sat around for a long time, and we need to make the improvements that are long in the making at both of those intersections. I know Mr. Masuda has worked hard on these projects, and the residents of East Pasadena have as well. And so we have a responsibility to look closely at funding those projects fully and soon.
Mayor,
Mr. Kenneth?
haven't there been other areas in our city that we've done the analysis and we found the money super fast just as we had done the analysis?
You'll recall that we kept the list of, the city attorney will jump in, so I'll moderate my comments, but of intersections in desperate need of investment, and I consider these to be in that category. And you're right. I mean, that's how we should operate, is looking at capital improvements, looking at safety and security first and foremost, and these two intersections certainly qualify for that.
So my view, Mayor, is that when the factual predicate has been set, we have only one responsibility, and that is to ameliorate the situation.
Yeah, and that's what I'm suggesting is, you know, let's give Ms. Cornejo and the city manager and the staff an opportunity to come back to us with grant opportunities. Hopefully, they'll be successful. And if we need to rededicate dollars, but if we aren't successful, and also prioritize it, given, you know, the federal investments that we all are looking forward to in infrastructure, prioritize some of those dollars to fully funding these projects. But in the absence of that, we'll have to make a difficult decision and maybe reallocate or appropriate dollars from other projects to ensure that these projects are constructed quickly. We have a responsibility to do that.
And I like your comment, Mayor, about prioritization, because obviously, I don't think one council member alone knows about all the prioritizations that have already been made based upon facts that we may not be able to fully discuss here. You alluded to that, and I'll leave it at that. And thank you for the opportunity to share.
Thank you. Okay, so now I think is the moment where
Mayor,
I
have a questions. And I did ask the majority of my questions about other departments during the presentation. So thank you to staff for all of the presentations. Great work. To the item of the police department, I have asked for these items to come to public safety so that we could have a real in-depth conversation about each dollar and how it's going to be used in a detailed manner. Unfortunately, we are now at this point where we're going to be voting on something, and I think I am generally supportive of the efforts. You know, maintaining our facilities is definitely key across the city for all city employees, as well as for the public. I mean, you know, we get complaints about the upkeep of our buildings all the time. People walk in the building and say, this is the worst building I've ever been in, or they look at it in the outside. But the school district gets those complaints all the time, right? So I definitely get that, and I'm very supportive of it. But in this case, because of the lack of trust, and I'm just going to call it what it is, because of the lack of trust and the lack of city leadership being able to hold individual employees accountable, meaning police officers, and also we've seen also things from transportation, which is rehashing from Orange Grove Boulevard. When there's a lack of trust, you're going to get a lot of public comment. And until we are able to become transparent, and as transparent as we possibly can with every detail to you know, what walls they're painting, if that's what the ask is, I think that we have to show that, because at the end of the day, these are public dollars that we are, you know, allocating for different things. I support the truck. I think the truck is fantastic, and I think it's a great way to get our police officers in the community. And yeah, I heard some of the public comments about, you know, coffee shops and, you know, using those dollars locally. It's great. You know, we could have community meetings in locations, but I think the best way to do it is actually to have people on the block where you can walk outside and there's no excuse not to be able to show up. And with a mobile command station like that, and also what we have at the Foothill Workforce Development Board is another mobile unit where we go out and, you know, get people to apply for jobs, and it's mobily, so it gives nobody an excuse not to interact and not to be a part of the process. And so I'm supportive of that. But I think that there are questions that need to be answered, and what the use of the command station is. I mean, the PowerPoint was great, did give us some ideas, but I think there are a lot of questions that community members brought up tonight, and also in previous meetings, even public safety meetings, that still have gone unanswered. The general fund, where did the police chief miraculously find this money, or how did he save it? I mean, I think people want to understand that. And can the money just go back into the general fund pot, and can we use it on other things? People do want to understand if that is a possibility. And so I would like for this to come to to the Public Safety Committee meeting to actually have a in-depth conversation about the CIP involved and the police department. And if there are other questions about transportation, I think that as Vice Mayor has mentioned in multiple meetings, that, you know, he wants to see some of these finance things come to us before it gets to the city council. So there's a couple extra levels of places to vet. So with that being said, I'm just asking if this item could be discussed prior to a full approval for the police department, because of the lack of trust, we're going to get a lot of these type of emails. I think it would be appropriate for that to be discussed at public safety, and if the council gives us approval to move approval at public safety, then I think that's how we should move about this. Just my opinion. Otherwise, I don't just support it. I'm just saying I can't be able to feel comfortable not having all of the answers that community members have asked for.
Thank you, Mr. Hampton. Mr. Mermel, the origin of the dollars is from savings in the police department budget, previously allocated savings. But what was it? Maybe you can give us a little more explanation. Was it overtime? Was it unfilled positions?
Sure. Thank you, Mayor. The savings don't come from any particular line item. They're operational savings that the department has achieved by managing its budget. To answer Councilmember Hampton's question, if these appropriations were not made, the money would return. Any underspending within the police department or any general fund department for that matter would return to fund balance at the end of the year, at the end of the fiscal year. So that is true, that if they didn't spend the money, all things being equal, it would come back into our undesignated fund balance to be reallocated by the council at some future date. I also think it's wholly appropriate for the police department to explain to the Public Safety Committee more at an operational level how it would utilize, how it has utilized the vehicle we have. The fact that it's in bad shape, I think, has limited the amount of times we've used it, but we can talk about how we would plan to use a vehicle, not just for police services, but for other services. I think that's a wholly appropriate discussion to have with Public Safety Committee. As it relates to the building, it's largely a building maintenance issue. We appropriate $1 million every year in the building maintenance fund to take care of city facilities. It's just frankly inadequate. And the fact that the police department was able to underspend a little bit, knowing, as I told the chief, if you underspend your budget, we'll ask the council to put that money back into the building, creates an incentive. It's the city's building. It needs to be maintained. It won't affect police services per se, but it has an impact on our employees and the people that come to the building. And I appreciate Councilmember Hampton's comments on that. We want people to feel that our city buildings live up to Pasadena standards.
Mr. City Manager, am I correct that part of the renovation includes the reopening of or is that an operational issue of the
lobby? Yep. I believe it does. I know that some of that's been a staffing issue, but there's also a desire to obviously it's a beautiful library for people. It's a beautiful lobby for people who have entered the police building, but it's big and it's open and it's not very secure. And so some of the work we need to do is to make some adjustments in that first floor lobby area so we can unlock the lobby and allow people into it. That's something Councilmember Hampton has been asking for a long time. And so I would make sure that we prioritize getting that done.
Well, I do think that that includes service to the community, is access to the department. I mean, we've all had to see the shutting down of the lobby, and then what really is a records lobby for records requests has become the lobby for the police department, and I don't think that's as efficient or
You're right.
effective.
The record center is now the de facto lobby, which is not ideal.
Mayor, please.
So it does involve services, and you know, I think there is a valid point to be made that we should understand and we must understand all of the specifics, but I don't know that that prevents us from making the allocation and then having a presentation. If need be, we can amend the budget going forward. Mr. Kennedy?
Mayor, I just would like to add my recollection when I was chair of the Public Safety Committee. The police chief and appropriate staff made a sincere commitment that it would reopen. And that was in fact Councilmember Hampton's request. So it is at least one council member's expectation, and possibly the whole council, that that is in fact the case, that it will reopen with these requirements to make certain or adjustments to accommodate the request and the commitment that had already been given to, I believe, the Public Safety, no, I know the Public Safety Committee, but possibly even through the budget process, the council. So I'm happy that they're moving forward, and I would like the city manager to reaffirm that they are in fact going to open the lobby. I think that's a reasonable request based upon commitments that were already made, Mayor.
Well, it's an important aspect of public safety. The residents should have access to the police department, and the lobby's the front porch. So, Mr. City Manager, the front door, I should say.
Well, and Mayor, as I committed, and I'm checking with the police chief right now, that we would commit to undertake that work to allow us to reopen the lobby, and I'm trying to get some confirmation that that's included in this first year work plan.
Okay, why don't we, while you do that, why don't we see if there are any other questions or comments?
The answer is yes, Mayor.
My recollection is that that was a component, and an important component of the maintenance and renovation.
So with that being said, as much as I appreciated and supportive of the concepts as a whole, as the city manager just sent a text to the police chief to make sure that was part of what he anticipated. I think it should all be in writing where we could all look at it, right? So that we know that we're allocating all the right things. Maybe there's something else that, community members would like to see on the truck, right? And so, I'm generally supportive of it, but I still think that, like I said, there's going to be a lot of scrutiny around certain departments, especially when there's a lack of trust. And as a person who represents a community that is looking for transparency and wanting to be able to trust, I can't feel comfortable saying, yeah, I'm good with all of this, not knowing what all of it is. And as much as I appreciate the city manager texting the chief about it, 6 months from now, we're gonna have a new chief. And these dollars ain't going to be spent, and we won't even have the doors won't be open, so it might be even a different conversation.
The public and all of us do have it's a duty and a responsibility to understand the allocation. And so I agree with Mr. Hampton that we should have an accurate description. Again, that doesn't mean we don't proceed. I mean, the truck is very important in my view. I mean, I hear Mr. Hampton saying the same thing.
And Mayor, I'm not saying that we don't proceed.
Yeah.
You know, I want to say that we proceed. All I'm saying is if we can hold this item, take it to public safety and put it on the consent calendar as it's now moved forward with our budget discussion at the council level. Or if the council will say, you know what, we support the public safety's decision on how these dollars are going to be allocated before we say, checkbox, here goes $5 million and spend it how you like, because unless the city manager gets a text message, we don't really know what's going to happen.
But it's not, Mr. City Manager, we're not, are we fully funding this? I think my recollection is we're not fully funding, we're appropriating dollars, but it remains a project that's not fully funded. Is that correct?
Well, as to the building, there's a budgetary estimate over 3 years of $3 million, but the project is not a single lump of labor, if you will. It's a series of work on the building. And the way that we're approaching it, it's really conditional on the ability of the police department to achieve enough savings, excuse me, to pay for it. So I think the best way to look at it is it's really a year to year. And while it's an estimated project with $3 million, the requested appropriation is $1 million. And it will have to be remain to be seen, even if the council approves it this year, whether it's sustainable to fund it in the subsequent year. And then as it relates to the mobile command center, the appropriation would be made. It's a one-time acquisition. The vehicle gets fabricated much in the same way when we buy a fire truck.
Yeah, and so the vehicle, I don't think there's any argument on, and you know, that's an issue of community safety, community outreach, participation, public safety, officers. I mean, I think the vehicle is extremely important, and I just want to ensure that I'm correct that proceeds, but the remainder of the maintenance, the work plan on the building is a project is not fully funded even with this.
Mayor, I'm just saying, from my hesitation of it, right? This is just my hesitation. You guys can decide however you want to do it. That people want to understand what's going to be on this truck, right? I mean, we're going to update this truck. The old truck is just an old RV that it just rolls around and, you know, they issue out coffee. This new truck, based on the pictures we saw, had a satellite, maybe has cameras all around it. Who knows if they're doing facial recognition on it? I don't know. I'm not saying that that's happening. All I'm saying is we don't know.
We would be happy to, we'd be happy to do a presentation at the Public Safety Committee on what technology such a vehicle would have. It would not have facial recognition. So we're happy to do that. Whether the council, you know, holds off on my recommendation would be make the appropriation. That's not the contract to expend the money. That's just making the budget allocation. And then if the council wants a list of what items are getting painted and carpet swatches and things for the building, you can have that.
I think the point, Mr. Hampton, is if we make
that's funny on the carpet swatches. I really appreciate that. I do want to get that detailed in, and I could be the council designated interior designer, Mr. City Manager. I really appreciate that.
Parliamentarian and interior design. I agree with the city manager that, you know, we can have that listing, we can have the presentation, but appropriating the dollars is really just setting them aside, not necessarily the amount needed, but it would be setting aside dollars towards that amount.
Well, and another way to look at it is we would be taking it out of the police department's budget before they go spend it on something else.
Yeah, the operational budget.
Thank you, Mayor, for recognizing me. I would like to move staff's recommendation. I'd like in that recommendation to be modified such that the city manager comes back with the police chief if necessary and give a detailed understanding related to not only the police vehicle, which I do think a new command vehicle is critically important, particularly in times where mutual aid exists. But it would be disrespectful to the council member that has made the request not to provide the information. And then secondarily, I also believe since the council member raised the issues of transparency, there's absolutely no downside to come back to the Public Safety Committee and provide that. And if necessary adjustments need to be made, we are the ones, not the city manager per se, to make those adjustments. So at this time, I think, like you have already said, Mayor, we don't go one or the other. We can actually do both. So I'm moving staff's recommendation, and I'm including the request that both in the colloquy between you and the whole council and Councilmember Hampton be included, and that it comes to public safety for further elucidation, so we really know some of the details. And I do think it's not appropriate to belittle anyone's comments when they're very serious. And I take Mr. Hampton's comments extremely serious. Thank you.
I think, you know, in terms of the process, I do think we, you know, we need to proceed with the vehicle because, you know, it's, I don't want to be caught flat-footed in an emergency where we need the vehicle. And look, we've seen a number of incidents in and around the city where I asked about the vehicle and why we weren't using the vehicle as a means of operations, more effective and efficient operations. I know others of you, other members of the council did as well. And it needs to be updated for public safety purposes and for officer safety purposes, all of the things that we know are important. But I agree that, you know, there's nothing wrong with proceeding and then having a clear presentation on how these dollars are going to be expended, but not hold up the vehicle. I think
the purchase of the vehicle, I'm so sorry, Vice Mayor, I have a question, but the purchase of the vehicle does come back to us just like any other purchase, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's what I was going to just articulate. I think these, you know, appropriations need to be expended against contracts, and maybe to be responsive to Councilmember Hampton and Kennedy. The Public Safety Committee could look at, ask the staff to share the RFP or whatever the requirements are, so that we're not just, there'll be an opportunity to check in before the bids come back. Because a lot of times once you're left with a choice once the bids are in front of you. So maybe John and Tyron, if that were helpful, but I do think we should appropriate the dollars, and this is really about how the dollars get expended and what the level of detail is in terms of those specific contracts.
Yeah.
I'm prepared to second the motion.
There's an opportunity there. I think Mr. Hampton raises valid points that it's an issue of both transparency and public safety, and we'll just have a presentation.
Mayor, just a reminder, we need to close the public hearing before we move to
Okay.
Move to close the public hearing.
Second.
There's a motion on the floor.
To close the public hearing, Councilmember Hampton,
Yes.
Councilmember Kennedy,
Yes.
Councilmember Madison is absent, Councilmember Masuda,
Yes.
Councilmember Rivas,
Yes.
Councilmember Williams,
Yes.
Councilmember Wilson,
Yes.
Mayor Gordo.
Yes.
Motion to close the
And-
public hearing is approved without objection.
And on the merits, is there a motion? Oh, Mr.
There is
Kennedy
a
made
motion and a second.
Okay.
Should I do it?
And so just so we're clear, we proceed and then have a, it's been made clear that there's also the expenditure that needs to be approved. And so that's also another opportunity. But in the interim, we'll have more information and for purposes of transparency of presentation.
And to be clear, just for everyone, I mean, because there was a lot of dialogue there, the motion, Councilmember Kennedy, you could repeat your motion that the discussion of updates to the facility will be discussed at public safety, as well as the new it's not RV, it's for the bus. It's kind of, it looks like an RV to me, but I guess it's not recreational. So it's got to be something that the new command van will have also a discussion prior to moving it to city council for approval.
So it's for the actual expenditure, because we're moving forward with the allocation and appropriation. That would just be the expenditure.
The expenditure, but the expenditure before deciding on what bus they're going to buy or what RV they're going to buy, that presentation will come to public safety so we know what's on the RV, right?
Well, let me clarify, but generally we would ask the city clerk to make sure, and he would read back, but just to clarify, there's nothing that you have said that is inconsistent, Councilmember Hampton, with my motion. We do expect staff to come back to public safety and make a full presentation that would give us those greater details that you're requesting. In addition to that, when the actual letting of the RFP or however that is handled, generally we give the latitude to the city manager. I do not want, as one council member, do not want to take that power away. How we exercise the power, as you already know, is that if there's an objection to the award of a contract to anyone, the council has the right over a certain dollar amount to pull that matter. And so I would ask that the city clerk share with the council the understanding you have of the motion.
Sure.
Just to clarify.
Yep. Your motion was to approve the staff recommendation with the city manager and police chief to provide a detailed explanation to the public safety committee regarding the police department's related CIP budget appropriations as part of this, as part of the staff recommendation.
I think that's sufficient.
Yeah. Okay.
And that includes, I just make sure it's clear, that includes the RV or recreational truck to give us details of what.
Yes, because that was part of the that was part of the CIP budget appropriation, so that was part of the motion.
I understand it. I just want to make sure that people who are watching understand. Thank you.
Understood. Thank you.
I want to make sure those are the two items in question. I don't know the way you've written it, Mark, whether there are other police department appropriations. I don't think there's an intention to.
There's only 2 police department related CIP items. So those, that's the universe. And I'll connect with the mayor. It'd be our hope that to present this as quickly as next week's public safety meeting.
Yeah, we can do it. We'll try to do it on the 19th.
Okay. So I reissue my second.
Am I correct? Steve, that's the next.
That's correct, sir.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second, and we'll go ahead and call the roll.
Councilmember Hampton?
Yes.
Councilmember Kennedy?
Yes.
Councilmember Madison is absent. Councilmember Masuda?
Yes.
Councilmember Rivas?
Yes.
Councilmember Williams?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Wilson?
Yes.
Mayor Gordo?
Yes.
The motion is approved without objection.
Okay, so let's move on. That moves us to
item 11, because item 10 is
item 11. Yeah. Item 11 is a pre-development plan review, and this is for information purposes only. Mr. Clerk or Mr. City Manager?
Mayor, one moment, as appropriate staff comes into the room. David Reyes, Director of Planning and Community Development, and Jennifer Page, Deputy Director. And I think we may have additional staff people dialing in. Martin Potter.
Mayor Gordo, City Council, this is a smaller project in terms of PPR that we'd present to the City Council, only 8 units. But it represents an interesting policy question in that this is existing land that was previously owned by Caltrans and was recently sold. So the zoning is PS and the parcel itself doesn't exist quite yet. And the applicant is looking to do housing on the site that would require a general plan amendment and a zoning code amendment as well. And with that, let me turn it over to Mr. Martin Potter, Mayor, if that's okay at this point in time.
Thank you, Mr. Reyes. Mr. Potter? Mr. Potter?
Sorry about that. Good evening, Mayor Gordo and members of the City Council. Martin Potter with the Community Planning Section. So this project, as Mr. Reyes mentioned, is a vacant site. It was formerly owned by Caltrans, and it's directly adjacent to the 210 freeway. It's currently zoned PS, which is public and semi-public. The applicant has proposed, as part of this project, to rezone it as RM16 and within the Lincoln Avenue specific plan. The property does not currently have a general plan designation. However, the applicant has proposed it to be designated as medium density residential. The approximate boundaries correlate to about 23,000 square feet in size. And as part of the application, the applicant is proposing 8 units of market rate housing with 2 parking spaces per unit for a total of 16. On this map, you can see in yellow the approximate boundaries of the site. It's adjacent to single family residential right on the corner of Lincoln and Canada Avenue, and single and multifamily above, and the 210 freeway to the south with an on-ramp. This is looking west from Lincoln towards the site. So you can see to the right, there's the single family house that's existing on a different parcel. And then to the left is the on-ramp. This is looking from a little further up on Lincoln south towards the site, just for some context. So you can see the corner of Lincoln and Canada Avenue there. This is looking directly across from the subject site. So there's multifamily housing on the left side of the screen. There's one commercial property right at the corner where the off-ramp is. And then on the other side of the off-ramp, that's zoned, and that's an office and bus depot for, I believe, First Academy bus lines. This is a site plan that was submitted by the applicant showing the approximate footprint of the apartment complex, along with a driveway with access off of Lincoln Avenue and common space at the front, side, and rear of the property. These are some floor plans. It's a 3-story project. So the first floor has parking and the main entrance. Second floor and third floor have living space, basically. This is the north elevation of the project. So this is facing north as you go up Lincoln with garage access, primary access, and the rest of the elevation there. This is the south elevation. So this is the side facing the freeway. This is the east and west sides. So the east side, which is on the left of your screen, is the side that faces Lincoln, and the west side faces opposite of Lincoln. So these are some comments. This is just a brief overview that was provided by our current planning section. There are more comments that are provided as attachment C to your packet. In the existing PS zone, the use or residential use is only allowed with a conditional use permit, and then only as accessory to another use. The density, height, and parking that would be allowed are determined through that conditional use permit process. For RM16 zoning, multifamily residential would be permitted by right. The RM16 zone would allow for 16 dwelling units per acre, which on a site of this size would correspond to 8 units. The height for this project would be 30 feet, plus an additional 4 feet for the parapet, which is within the RM16 standards, which I believe are 36 feet. And the parking that would be required is 2 covered spaces per unit. Based on the size of the units that are proposed, that would be 16, which is also being proposed. For this project, there are a number of entitlements that would be required before approval could happen. A general plan amendment would be required to establish a general plan land use designation. A specific plan amendment would be required to incorporate the property into the Lincoln Avenue specific plan boundaries. A zoning map amendment would be required to change the zone from PS to RM16, and a tentative track map would also be required for this project. Additionally, design review would also be required, starting with preliminary consultation and moving through concept and final design. The next steps for this project would be for the applicant to submit to conduct environmental review per CEQA, to conduct a notice public hearing before the Planning Commission and City Council for the general plan, specific plan, and zoning map amendments, to conduct a notice public hearing before the hearing officer for the tentative track map application, and to conduct design review. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you for your time.
Mayor, some of the issues that we're looking at, if the applicant does want to go forward, from an environmental justice perspective, this is literally adjacent to a freeway on-ramp. There would be concerns with respect to health of potential future residents. So there would need, look at screening options, tall wall, some very filters. Even then, we would need to make sure that a health risk assessment was done. There's some design issues that we've expressed some concerns about. So there's a whole host of potential issues, even ahead of the policy question that they'll have to ask, which is whether or not there's any appetite to do a zone change and a general plan amendment to allow housing here. Again, housing's not allowed on the site today. It's allowed only as an accessory to another main permitted use. So this is really a first for us in terms of this property. I think it was recently sold by Caltrans. I understand that the property owner is on the call with us this evening, and I understand wants to make a few statements.
Okay, well, before we do that, let me see if there are any questions from members of the council, and then we can turn to Mr. Masuda, followed by Vice Mayor Wilson.
Thank you, Mayor. David and Martin, I noticed that I saw the garages below, and what kind of a plan do you have when it's new construction for earthquake preparation?
So first of all,
construction.
right. So in the first instance, they would have to comply with the existing uniform building code that is in effect at the time that the applicant submits the application. And those are updated with the most recent California seismic safety requirements. So they would need to comply with all of that in the first instance. You did note the tuck under or at grade parking that's being proposed as current. We don't want to get too far into that. Apply our City of Gardens, which requires a lot different site layout and design than is being proposed. So there would be a lot of work that would be needed. The tuck under parking, not ideal, but the site is unique with respect to its configuration. So, I think a lot of work ahead. And sorry that I went off topic there, but with respect to safety, the UBC is the first step in that process.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Masuda. Vice Mayor Wilson, followed by Mr. Kennedy.
David, so I know this is adjacent to the Lincoln Avenue specific plan, but I haven't memorized the plan. So how consistent is this with the uses that are contemplated? And this maybe to Martin, that are around the subject property?
Yeah, the use is pretty close. You do see multifamily in and around at that low scale, that RM16 scale. So that's very consistent. Obviously, right adjacent to it is single family, but just a little bit further beyond is the RM16 zoning, as well as across the street. So really the massing and height with respect to the context, probably they're in line in terms of that RM16 standards, but we do have that single family property right next to them. There would need to probably be some real evaluation of how they're going to potentially impact. And what's being proposed now is a driveway, which does provide a further buffer from building to building.
So this would be, once again, if you look at, I don't have the plan, but what else would happen if the Lincoln Avenue specific plan, that multifamily use is what's contemplated. I know that's what's there. I wasn't sure what.
Yeah.
Sometimes the plans are different than what we have, so this is consistent with what we would see and desire to have in that area.
Vice Mayor, to specifically answer your question, this property is not currently within the city. It's not currently even a parcel. And so it's not within the city's specific plan currently, but it is in line with the surrounding context.
Okay. Then I was concerned about that single family little residence stuck in that little island.
Absolutely.
The developer maybe tried to acquire that. I mean, it's really weird. I mean, I'm just wondering whether feels like an orphan property that I don't know what that could be used for. And if we're gonna have multifamily, it feels, as my teenage son would say, janky. The way it's kind of shoehorned in there and leaves that little tip of a corner. How do you guys feel about that?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think that's a very Northern California saying, but I think that it is extremely unique, and we were very surprised, Vice Mayor, when this was submitted to us. We were surprised that Caltrans had sold it, but it is sold, and we looked at it. I think the challenge, if the applicant, were to purchase and successfully obtain that property, if that's what that property owner wanted to do in terms of selling it, I think it could make a much sort of nicer, complete development site, if you will, have nice setbacks from the streets and be able to really do what it wants to do in terms of providing maybe a garden court area. I think that the challenge is going to be that I don't think that the property owner does have control of it, and we are not really in position to, dictate what happens. If the property owner of the single family home wants to maintain that, they have every right, and it would be our job to make sure that any future development would, be respectful of that with respect to massing, setbacks, potential shade shadow issues, and privacy and privacy and light concerns.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Martin.
Thank you. Mr. Kennedy?
Okay. Now, I think I'm a little bit confused on the map.
It's right by Mirror, just south of Mirror. See entry to the 210. It's just south of Mirror on the west side.
Yep. Thank you, Mayor. At some point, I would like to ask the applicant, if not tonight, at another time, is he also making consideration or having some thought about other than residential for that property? I think it's a huge stretch. It's not impossible, but it's a huge stretch. And I'd be concerned about safety. I'd be concerned about the amendment to the general plan. And I would assume that, would we have to amend the specific plan as well? Or have we, or
as Councilmember Kennedy, as the applicant has proposed right now, they're seeking to add it to the Lincoln Avenue specific plan. So an amendment would have to be made to incorporate it into the boundaries, yes.
I see. And I know that area well, since the mayor helped point it out to me in the map that's included, but I don't see it right now. And I think we really need to hear from the applicant. And I don't understand why our development department wasn't notified of a potential sale. So that begs the question generally that we can't necessarily go into tonight. But Martin, Mr. Potter, I'd like you to give us some exposition, or Mr. Reyes, on, I've seen a lot of work elsewhere in the city on Caltrans-owned properties. And I'd like to know if the city is appropriately notified prior to any transfer of the fee in any kind of way. I think that's incumbent upon who we are as a city, that we would receive such notifications. as it relates to this project specifically, I think the applicant or developer has a huge hurdle, and I'm very much interested because the hurdles that the applicant has to overcome are obvious hurdles and just have been touched upon briefly by my colleagues. I want to hear from the applicant, Mayor.
Well, let's, on the issue of Caltrans communicating, Mr. Mermel, we've struggled with Caltrans not communicating to us as often as we believe they should. How is it that, and the follow-up question is are there other parcels, but how is it that they would put for sale, I imagine through the Surplus Act, they put this property up for sale and how is it that we wouldn't know about it?
Mayor, excuse me, as it relates to the sale of homes, in the past, we've been advised when Caltrans has gone forward to try to sell improved properties, but there have been other instances, this being one of them, where it appears that Caltrans has sold remnant properties, unimproved properties, and as best we can tell, we don't receive notification. We would need to research further as to what those requirements are. We're happy to make contact with Caltrans. In the past, we've looked at that site and thought it was really not appropriate for the city to do anything there. So we can try to understand better, and we are engaged with Caltrans as it relates to other matters of mutual concern. So we happy to follow up on it.
I think, am I correct to guess that this would have gone through the Surplus Land Act procedure? I mean, that's a pretty involved procedure.
I think that their procedures are different as it relates to, again, say selling the 710 the homes, as it relates to remnant lots and things. I think that they're able to dispose of it quicker without as much process. It sure seems that that's the case. As I mentioned, there's a couple of other properties, I think further down St. John, where they were sold to a private developer, and a person built 2, possibly 3 homes. So it goes through a different process. What their obligation is as far as notification to the local jurisdiction, I do not know, and we will try to find out.
Yeah, I think there's a procedural issue here that we need to better understand, both what the process, well, one, how many more lots are held by Caltrans or any other state agency that might be disposed of. 2, what the city's right maybe to get in line for those properties might be. And then the third issue, what the process is for disposal of the properties. And so I think all of those issues don't necessarily affect this project, but this project does raise those questions.
Mayor, I have one last question. I really didn't ask the question, but I have one now. And it's a simple question. Is there a vacation being considered on this particular property, Mr. Reyes? Not on that property, but in this project, rather.
What do you mean by vacation?
Of a street.
Nothing's being contemplated. My understanding is that the owner obtained it through what's called the director's deed. He's now working with the county to get an assessor's number. There is no vacation that's being proposed by the city or the applicant at this point in time for any public right-of-way.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay. And design, does this go through some review process? I'm not completely enamored with with what we see here. It's very boxy. I'm not sure that it's completely fitting with the historic homes and bungalow style homes in and around the neighborhood, both on the east and mostly on the east.
Mayor,
and I'm just curious what the process would be for design.
You're correct. They would need to start from the beginning with design review. The project as currently contemplated doesn't comply with the City of Garden standards. If the council but that design process happens after the entitlement phase. If the council were to approve the zone change and general plan amendment to allow up to 8 units to be built, they would then need to go through the design review process.
So this is more of a placeholder than anything else.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that. It is very boxy, and I don't think fitting with the surrounding architecture, bungalows, and, City of Gardens, open space. I think it needs work. Okay. Well, this is for information purposes. Oh, we did have Mr. Hampton. This is in your.
Yeah, this is in my district. I was gonna say something at first, but I wanted to hear what my other colleagues had to say. I would definitely not describe the property next door to it as janky. I would definitely describe it as a neighbor who's lived there for 45 years, actually 45 years plus. Not saying that I understand what you're saying. I know the development. I get what you're saying, but I just want to clarify that because I think sometimes.
Just to be clear, I think chopping off and leaving it an island was leaving that property owner in a weird position. Not that the property is. I'm not familiar with the property. That wasn't my.
Yeah, Caltrans did that when they came through with the 210 freeway. They did this all across. If you notice where the 210 came through, you could see where some of the properties Caltrans didn't need. They really messed up the way those properties. I would say the property boundaries were lined up. So it came through with the 210 when communities of Japanese and African American descent were asked to leave by eminent domain. So I just want to say that I think that the property, based on my experience and what community members had asked for when I first got elected, they were asking for potentially a park of some nature in that location. City staff was aware of this property being sold by Caltrans, so I do want to make sure that that is clear because I made it very aware of this property being sold by Caltrans. As city staff at the time, who's now these city staff members are no longer with the city. Actually, all three of them are no longer with the city that were aware of it. And I just assumed that it went up the chain of command. But probably not a good assumption to make since the city manager is saying he didn't know anything about it. They're all gone, but it was originally looked at as a potential for a pocket park. But because of the safety concerns being so close to the freeway, probably not the greatest idea. That's one thing that neighbors were looking at potentially putting a community garden there. Caltrans kind of was not in favor of that, and then no one knew exactly where to get the water from. I'm just giving history of what the community is looking for in that space. That space has been a bit of an eyesore, so now that it's owned by someone, and it seems like it's been owned by them for maybe the better part of a year. The ground has been maintained because Caltrans, unless we called Caltrans out, city staff called Caltrans out, they were not maintaining that properly. I know that there's a need for housing, for sale housing, so that checks the box there, but also there's a need for moderate and affordable housing, and it doesn't seem like any of these pieces, based on what is being presented right now, of course things can change, and this is just for information, check that box, which is really important to the council as well as the community as a whole to have moderate or affordable units available for purchase in that neighborhood. It's a single family residential neighborhood adjacent to a high school. those are just my comments on it. And then as far as the other Caltrans properties that are at the end of St. John, city manager, were they zoned in the city or were they also out of, did that property owner have to actually come to the city to get proper zoning for it?
Council member, I'll let David Reyes answer that. I believe it already fit within existing zoning.
Thank you, Mr. City Manager. And in the first instance, Mr. Hampton, Councilmember Hampton, you're absolutely correct. We were aware of the sale of this property by Caltrans that was on the market. We, however, didn't get notification that it was actually sold. So that's what came as a surprise to us that it was sold. And that's maybe the conversation with Caltrans that we need to have. Yeah, and the other properties on St. John's were already zoned. So once they were sold, they just simply came in and submitted building permits consistent with existing zoning and obtained building permits to build the houses. And I believe it was 2.
Oh, okay. Thank you. I just, as my colleagues mentioned, it seemed like it's, a bit of a hurdle here for this potential project, but, I would just say that there needs to be a significant amount of community outreach, Lincoln Properties down the street, and I can't think of the other project, which is developer's name is Fahim, I just don't know the name of his company, has done a lot of community outreach. So also just want to mention that it's not consistent, as all you guys have mentioned, design-wise, and of course this hasn't gone through design, with the community architectural style in that neighborhood. So those are my comments on it. And I guess, looking forward to hearing more about the potential. I think overall, this is something that something in that space could receive community support, right? Something in that space, because it has been just pretty much a blighted piece of land by Caltrans. So looking forward to hearing that the developer's done its due diligence to do all the outreach. And, my office will be willing to have as many community meetings about this project as we have with any project. And it's really important that when these pieces of developments come in, that the community is really, really engaged and we're all getting something that we want and actually something that we need in the neighborhood, and not just, oh, we're just going to throw affordable housing here, or we're going to throw in the Taj Mahal of housing in a community that is not looking for exactly that. I think that there is a way to indicate the needs of the community within the design style, as well as through outreach to all of our community members. So that's of course the most important thing to me, is just the outreach and getting the word out that this is potentially something that is going to happen. And then of course the importance of the council is to have at least 1 or 2 of these units moderately affordable or affordable. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hampton. Now we'll turn to the owner of the property. I think it's William, and I apologize if I don't pronounce it correctly. Purnamandari?
Purnamandari, exactly. I'm here on behalf of the applicant.
Well, the applicant, it's often said that buy land because they're not making more of it, but the applicant is now asking us to make a parcel out of this.
Of course, yeah.
So
Thank you so much, Mr. Mayor and Mr. Hampton, all the council member, for meeting tonight. We really appreciate it. We love to hear all your comments. Essentially, as said before, this site was purchased by Caltrans, from Caltrans, and unfortunately, it was missed by the general plan. Therefore, there is no current designation. However, as also mentioned, there is all the surrounding to the north and south of the property. There is a general plan designation of RM16, which we are requesting. So it seems that it would be in line with the surrounding uses if the council and the neighborhood obviously would entertain it. And we're looking, to do anything we can. That way we can keep the residents happy, the council, of course, all options on the table, affordable, new design, everything. As of right now, the design is very preliminary and would likely not be able to go with that. It's just a placeholder because we have other concerns such as setbacks and these things. So, you know, obviously we want to get your input, see what you guys recommend, and then go from there. And then just make it a good project for the city, do whatever we can to help. And that's all I'm here for. I just wanted to thank all of you and see if there's anything else you guys need or would like to see in the project. We would love to include it. And then all options are on the table. Anything we can do to make it easier for you guys, we would love to hear. And that's about it.
Thank you, Mr. Permandari.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Appreciate you taking that position on behalf of the applicant. As you've heard, there are a number of questions and issues that need to be addressed.
Of course, exactly. It's
Okay.
unfortunate that the general plan missed it, but anything we can do, we would love to.
Thank you. Okay, I think that completes, unless the staff, Mr. Reyes or Mr. Potter or the city manager have any other comments. What procedurally, what's the next step here?
Yeah, the zoning exists on that property. It's just PS zoning that doesn't allow housing. So I don't think that it's an oversight in terms of what the issues are. But the next steps would be a formal application if the applicant wanted to move forward in terms of the general plan amendment and zone change that might allow a project to be built on the site at RM16 zoning. It sounds like some very robust outreach would be required. And I would be referring the applicant to Ms. Kushan Bell to coordinate some of that. So we would await an application to develop some of that outreach.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that completes this matter.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we'll move on to item 12, and this is a one-year review of the inclusionary housing ordinance, including updates and affordable housing concessions menu for density bonus projects. And I'll remind us that we still have a closed session matter to take up. That's expected to be fairly involved. Okay.
Mr. Mayor and City Council, this is a one-year review. It's just a study session this evening, so we're not really asking for a vote this evening. We will be coming back. This is really an ordinance that was developed in response to some state housing legislation that resulted in projects coming in and taking advantage of state density bonus law and projects being built out of context with neighborhood character and existing zoning rules. So in response, a local menu was developed and approved by the City Council. And this is that one-year review to share how that new ordinance has worked, some lessons learned, and where we think we might be going in terms of making a few tweaks to it after the one-year period. So again, just a study session this evening. We will be coming back with the formal recommendation on this item. And I'd like to introduce Mr. Andre Sahakian, Senior Planner in Community Planning, to walk through the PowerPoint, please.
Thank you, Mr. Reyes. Good evening, honorable mayor and council members. As Mr. Reyes mentioned, this is a one-year review of the recent changes to the inclusionary housing ordinance and the creation of the concession menu. As a reminder, when these ordinances were developed, the council tasked us with three policy goals. First one being to increase the production of affordable housing in the city. The second being to make sure that we do not prohibit additional housing production in the city and not creating overburdened costs for that. And finally, to incentivize projects that are more consistent with the expected scale and character of neighborhoods, particularly when it comes to concession permits. And so in response to that, we developed and the council adopted some changes to the inclusionary housing requirements. Primarily, it was increasing the requirement from 15 to 20% and breaking that down into 5% very low, 5% low, and 10% moderate for rental projects. I want to note that the 5% very low category was new with that change. The council also voted to eliminate the trade down provision that would have previously allowed developers to provide a total lesser number of affordable units, but have them be more affordable. So, for example, one very low income unit would have counted as 1.5 low income units, and we saw developers using that to get more density bonus and more concessions in exchange for a lesser total number of affordable units. And so that was eliminated. And finally, the in lieu fees for the inclusionary were also increased as part of that effort. The next thing that the council adopted was the affordable housing concession menu, and this was done to offset those costs of the increased inclusionary. And under the menu, a developer is eligible to choose up to 2 concessions that are on the city's menu, as long as they build the affordable units on site. And the benefit to the developer is that the affordable housing concession permit process, which typically took between six months and 2 years, and had a variety of costs associated with it, that process would be waived and the applicant would go directly to design review in exchange for staying on the menu. So the menu itself included 5 items. It included increasing the FAR, it included an additional 12 feet of height over 60% of the building, some reductions to side and rear setbacks, reductions to park, and a waiver of a variety of loading requirements. And so that was the menu that was decided upon. And so when we look back at the year since the changes became effective, we see that during that time, we saw 1 new affordable housing concession permit application filed. But that one in particular was filed because it also required a conditional use permit. And since the menu does not waive the requirement for a CUP, there was little incentive to stay on the menu because they would still have to go through the typical process of hearings and all things that are associated with that. So we believe that's the reason why that one came in as a concession permit. Otherwise, there were no additional concession permit applications filed since these changes became effective. We saw 1 project that was already in the pipeline as a concession permit choose to switch to using the menu of concessions, which was a good thing. They decided to stick to the concessions that the council agreed upon. We did not see any projects that were already in the pipeline without asking for any concessions. We didn't see any of them switch to start to use concessions on the menu. That was a concern that if we create this process, that more and more projects start to ask for concessions. But that did not happen. And we saw 5 new applications come in directly into using the menu, whereas they might have otherwise come in